I'm going to call to order Committee of the Whole number 209 for Tuesday, December 8th. And in honor of the Liwatul, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Liwa Nation. This meeting of the committee is being held virtually with all meeting participants attending via electronic communications to adhere to the provincial health officer's orders respecting physical distancing requirements as a measure to prevent transmission of COVID-19. Committee members will be involved in and participate in the meeting virtually as they would in person. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. Recording the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Council members attending the meeting are required to verbally advise the chair of when they leave the meeting and return to the meeting so that this can be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. For clarity, if a council member does not verbally advise the chair but is observed to be absent from their video feed for an extended period of time and their video feed remains turned on, and it is unclear to staff whether they're present in the meeting, the council member will be marked absent from the meeting until such time as staff observes the council member to reappear in the video feed. With that, are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, could I get a motion to approve? Councilor Craddock, seconded by Councilor Antonelli. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of Committee of the Whole, meeting number 208 minutes from Tuesday, October 6th. Moved by?
Yeah.
Councilor Noble, seconded by Councilor Antonelli. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We're going to move right into the hillside development and retaining walls. We're just going to wait for Mr. Chalmers and Ms. Pedrini to join us. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're all set to go, so I'll turn it over to you for discussion on the hillside development and retaining walls.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon to the committee. We've got a report in front of you this afternoon that's got kind of two components, and we're going to run through several of them. It is around hillside development. The first part of the report is largely a check-in on some of the things that we've been doing to further council's efforts arising out of the hillside development standards, our guidelines that were produced by council in 2019. So I'll give a bit of an overview of several of the different departmental efforts that the village has undertaken there. And then we have a specific issue with a clause in the zoning bylaw that I know council is aware of that we'd like to open a discussion on today. And at a committee of the whole meeting, we're hoping that we can start a dialogue on this. There are some challenges that are being faced with some of the in-stream hillside developments that have been underway for some years, and a limitation on retaining wall heights outlined in the zoning bylaw. So we are seeking council direction on if you want us to proceed with looking at a zoning amendment, and if so, any comments on how you may like to see that unfold. So we are hoping for a dialogue on that matter specifically, but more generally, when council adopted the hillside development guidelines, it did give staff a very valuable tool. And what it did is it created an expression of some values around what the village of Pemberton is looking for with hillside developments. And a lot of them relate to the impacts that are in some cases inevitable if they're not controlled, but in other cases quite manageable if they're thought of well in advance, around the aesthetics of hillside developments, what they look like, some of the impact on viewscapes and view corridors of the development and from the development. And it's given us the ability to have more fulsome conversations with the development community when they're looking at working on hillside sites. When we brought that document forward, it was the thin edge of what we anticipate will be a much larger wedge in giving the village of Pemberton a comprehensive suite of policy tools to deal with and regulate hillside development. Some of the things that we are looking at in the medium term, we know that this will figure prominently in the official community plan review. There's an opportunity there for us to revisit certain policy directions, and quite particularly the development permit area guidelines and how council may take a more active role in regulating hillside development through the use of the development permit tool. There's certainly going to be some amendments that flow through the engineering section around hillside development standards, which again, when we look at some of the challenges with hillside standards, the types of roads and how roads are cut and how driveways are aligned and how the civic infrastructure is built and how some of the retention in roadways happens. And those things will certainly be material that will be part of the upcoming subdivision and development control bylaw review, which council also has identified as a medium-term priority for the village. And there'll likely be ripple down effects into the zoning bylaw as well. And we'll be talking about one of those in a few minutes. One of the challenges we've had with the guidelines is that the hillside development we're seeing hit the ground now are projects that have been in the works for quite some time. And with hillside development, the key trigger, the key thing we need to control is the alignment of roads, and not just where the roads go and how steep they are, but what's left on either side of those roads. And it's created a bit of a challenge in the application of the guidelines to those projects that we're calling today in-stream projects. So ones where the roads were designed and in many cases approved, and I will say properly approved for the time, under a certain policy framework, and how we're dealing with those through the transition to the new policy framework that we will introduce. And the challenge has been largely because lots have been subdivided and they're lawfully created, and they've transferred to individual property owners who are now seeking building permits on those lots. And the challenge really is, how do we manage the grades for those lots that have been created at a lot scale? And I will say generally it's much more challenging at a lot scale to deal with grade differentials than it is at a project scale. Sometimes in one road, you might have uphill and downhill grades that have very different treatments. There could be variation on the site. By its nature, the hillside is undulating and varying degrees of steepness that need to be accommodated. One of the tools that we're starting to implement immediately, and council has seen the first attempt at this, is to regulate the retention and the cutting and filling of land through the village's development permit powers under existing development permit area guidelines for protection of the natural environment and hazard areas. And what that will do is, instead of dealing with retention and grading at a lot level, we will be doing it at a comprehensive level. And development permits can be a prerequisite to building, which is how you've seen some recently, to a prerequisite to building permit, but they can also be a prerequisite to subdivision. And I know the approving officer with any new applications for subdivision on the hillside will be looking to that tool to help regulate how retention happens earlier in the planning process. And just generally, there's been a lot of advancements on the availability of topographic information through LiDAR surveys and all of this other stuff that, quite frankly, a lot of it probably wasn't available, at least to the extent it is now, when some of these subdivisions were originally done. So from this point forward, we don't expect that there will be the same challenges we're facing today with individual lot grading. We think that that's a problem that was identified some months ago, and we've come up with a solution, both an immediate and a medium and long-term solution through the policy development in the OCP and specific hillside development permit area guidelines. But what that leaves us is, it leaves us with a transition block of lots, let's call them. There's somewhere between 60 or 70 lots that have been subdivided, that are eligible for a building permit, that have not yet been built on. A lot of those are in Sunstone. Some of them are in the Ridge as well. Not all of them will command massive retention. There are some flat spots and some areas where retention has already been done at beyond a lot level. But there is that interim group of lots where we are going to face a challenge with how individual lots are retained. And it has to do with the lay of the land and the limited space that one has to work to make, in some cases, reasonably significant grading changes or alterations in the confines of a fairly small area. 7,500 to 8,000 square feet is not a lot of room to maneuver when you're looking at retention. In the past, another challenge we've had is that the zoning limitation from the 2018 bylaw is coming back to present some pretty significant policy issues. What that zoning bylaw did in 2018 was it took the previous zoning provision, which said you needed to have the wall engineered and reviewed by the building official if it was higher than 2.4 meters, and reduced that standard to 1.2 meters. So any wall currently in the village of Pemberton that's higher than 1.2 meters requires the services of a geotechnical engineer to design. As council may be aware, throughout the province, there's been a lot of attention, and rightfully so, based on some unfortunate incidents, some tragic incidents. there has been a move to push down the requirement for engineering of retaining walls for safety. And as I understand it, as advised by building, that's from the Association of Professional Geologists and Engineers of British Columbia, that now their guidelines suggest that a retaining wall over 1.2 meters should be certified by an engineer. That we believe is very reasonable. We have no issue or challenge or concern. In fact, we're very comfortable with that as a threshold for requiring engineering. The challenge is the way the provision of the zoning bylaw was written is it also established a maximum height of 1.2 meters. So what that means is that under the current bylaw, any retaining wall of 1.2 meters or higher is prohibited. What the second provision that's outlined in the staff report effectively does is it says an individual retaining wall can be is separated, cannot be closer than 60 centimeters from another retaining wall. So what that effectively tries to do is it tries to terrace and step retaining walls. Again, a strategy we anticipate utilizing in the village of Pemberton over time because it can soften the visual appearance of vertical walls. The challenge is at an individual lot level now, it's proving to be problematic with the amount of land that needs to be, or in some cases, the owner's desire to be retained on individual lots. That notion of stepping back starts eating into the footprint available on the lot. And we've seen some examples where that doesn't seem to be a viable option so far. We have to be honest and suggest we do not know why that maximum made its way into the zoning bylaw, despite passing through a number of eyes internally, through the multiple internal reviews, the community reviews, the public processes. We did speak with the initial consultant, and we got confirmation today from the initial consultant that it was included in the draft that was surrendered early in the process, and there was no real rationale or discussion for it. I went through every single draft that I was involved in the latter stages of the process. We have copious notes and records of all of the amendments throughout, and that just did not seem to register. Part of that might be that that type of retaining wall limitation is common in some zoning bylaws outside of hillside areas. If you think of the valley floor in a floodplain, sometimes in existing neighborhoods, a new house may be constructed that needs to meet a new flood construction elevation or a different flood construction elevation. And it's intended to regulate the grade differential between existing lots largely. So that's how I've seen that tool used in other jurisdictions. And in that sense, it makes an awful lot of sense, and is probably something the village would want to consider entertaining. However, it does not fit in a hillside context. We will say we've heard from council in the context of several applications recently, the valid concerns that council has about retaining walls. And I believe it's safe to say that the staff at the village also share those concerns and are looking at the best management tools we have to deal with them. But I do have to reiterate that we are in a situation, in a bit of a bind, where we have existing lot owners who have acquired lots, who have purchased lots, who are moving into the building phase to complete their homes, where that provision is going to pose a significant challenge. Most recently, over the last month or so, there's been two separate applications made for retaining walls. I don't want to get into the specifics of those necessarily today because they will be dealt with on their own merits. But those two applications appeared on the Board of Variance agendas. The Board of Variance was hesitant to deal with them and have referred them back. They believe that they were not small enough or minor enough under their mandate to deal with, so they've sent them back. What that would likely equate to is the first two development variance permits that council would see should council choose to retain the current zoning provisions. And that is an option. You certainly can do that and deal with retaining walls on an individual level. But I would suspect you're going to see the council will see a steady stream of development variance permit applications should you do that. And that's why staff brought this report forward, is we've identified that it is a problem and it is an issue. There are multiple solutions to the problem. One of them would be to keep things as they are. So that would be to not direct staff to pursue any changes to the zoning. The likely outcome of that would be a number of development variance permits that council would deal with over time. The number of which I can't speculate. I don't have the information to give you specifics on how many or how soon, but I just believe that there would be a number. The other option that we're presenting today, and it is our recommendation, is that the committee of the whole make a recommendation to council to direct staff to review the zoning provisions of the bylaw. As a baseline, we have the previous provisions of 2.4 meters as a reference height. We believe that the 1.2 meters is a better trigger for dealing with retaining walls, perhaps requiring a building permit, certainly requiring a building official review of a geotechnical report. One of the things we would consider, should council choose to send us off to do some review of this, is council through their zoning powers does have the ability to require landscaping. And you see that commonly for transitions between different uses. So industrial uses bordering on another use typically have to provide some landscape. Council will recall that along the highway and in the industrial 2 zone, there's a buffering requirement. We believe we could apply some of the same provisions for any retaining walls over 1.2 meters and have a mandatory requirement for landscaping. And there's other things that we could explore. I don't believe we're here today to represent a solution or the specifics of what that zoning amendment would look like. We've framed out this report in response to what we believe is a matter of some concern in the community and therefore of council. So we haven't had the luxury of the time necessary to put in a fulsome review of the zoning provisions, and what we may come back with as a recommendation, again, should council choose to send us away. But as a framework, that's one option that seems intuitive. It's a hybrid between the previous zoning bylaw provisions, which were effectively a trigger point for engineering review, and the 1.2 meters, which was established as that trigger point in the current bylaw, although it established a maximum. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I believe the idea would be to, I just got a little note here. Council did, or the committee of the whole did also receive a correspondence package from a number of neighbors. I just wanted to draw your attention to that. The correspondence did come through up until yesterday, so it was sent under separate cover by Ms. Fraser, yet I believe last night. So that's, again, another counterbalance that you may want to take into account in your consideration. But with that, we will leave it to you for discussion. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. If you'd like me to comment on any of the ideas in the report or anything else out of the council discussion, I'd be happy to do so as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. And before we get into it, we have this discussion. We have a few big discussions on both committee of the whole and the regular meeting tonight, some development applications. I'd really like to look to council to be, just so we could flush out all the information, to be disciplined in starting the process with asking questions or seeking clarity on the presentation or on the report, and then go into your comments. So, I'm going to ask for questions in a second, and then once we've flushed all that out, I'll start asking for comments. Of course, during the comment period, if through conversation we need more clarity from staff, we're certainly able to ask at that point. I just want to keep it so that we can get as much out of the presentation as possible. So one quick question for you, and I'll open it up, Mr. Chalmers. So the idea behind, if we were to send staff to look at a zoning amendment, keep, the recommendation at this point, keep the 1.2 trigger for engineering, is through that zoning amendment, would that come up with is the idea to come up with a set new maximum height that's firm and therefore everything else has a variance requirement? Or is it, will it be a different process? Because as you describe the challenges of doing this on a lot level, it sounds like there's a lot very much is dependent on the topography. So is that the suggestion?
Mr. Mayor, through you, that certainly could be an option that we entertain. The previous bylaw didn't establish a max. And I think part of the rationale for that may have been, and one of the things we would need to understand is how would we establish that maximum? Because if we set a maximum at 2 meters, and most of the retention needs to be 2.2 meters, you would be dealing with effectively the same challenge we're in now. Mm-hmm. It would be an extensive amount of work for us to understand the grades of each of those individual lots. There could be 50 to 60 of them. And for us to pick the threshold at which we'd establish a maximum, it's possible we could gather that information. It would take some time. And my concern with that approach is that the good part of it, we are dealing with a finite number of lots, we believe, under this kind of transitional area. So it's possible. Um, but I think if we're going to do that amendment, we can look at it, we can understand and report back to council on the effort that's involved. The inclination at this point would be to not establish a maximum. We don't anticipate there's any lots that are outrageous in terms of, you know, requiring vertical walls or those sorts of things. And there's other requirements as well, like driveway grades and other things that we will have to grapple with, not necessarily through this amendment specifically, but that also provides some limitation on how lots can be graded and built. So I would suggest that between that, council's fairly clear expression to date about their concerns about retaining walls and the application of the hillside development or the hillside design guidelines to the extent that they can be applied at a lot level. I'm not sure at this point we would be jumping to a maximum as the only option. It could be one, but an unregulated approach similar to the previous zoning bylaw might be an option as well. And that will depend on how council wants to deal with this matter. If they'd like to see each retaining wall come through variance, that's certainly an ability under the way it's zoned now. If there's a justifiable threshold where you want to see anything above that, we could look at that as well. So those kind of comments. I will say this, Mr. Mayor, one of the alternative recommendations does include the ability for council to provide some specific direction, such as the question that you made. So if committee of the whole wants to make that recommendation to council that certain things be considered or included, there's an alternate recommendation that's built for you to accommodate that.
Thank you. And if council did ask staff to undertake this amendment, I think you said there's about 60 plus lots in stream. How long does staff think this process would take, and therefore what does it mean for people's building timelines?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I think council could also provide direction on that as part of the resolution should they choose. So committee of the whole could make a recommendation that this be dealt with in a priority order. And it really frankly would depend on the nature of the amendment. If we were to do deep analysis on each of the lots, that would take more time than us following the general framework we laid out in the staff report, which is to establish 1.2 meters, to basically eliminate the maximum and add landscaping provisions. That would be a much more efficient turnaround time on something like that. So the bylaw work is not extensive in terms of what needs to be done, and we could return that to council in fairly short order, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. I have more questions, but I'm going to open it up for the rest of the committee. Questions for staff? Councillor Craddock.
Very much, Mayor Richmond. I guess my question is more to the fact that we don't seem to have any control over road elevations. What we saw in the original plan and some of the roads we ended up with.
Councillor Craddock, it's a little tough to make you out. I don't know if you could come in a little closer, maybe.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm looking at here is there's some things that purchase of properties don't have any input in, and one would be the road elevations. I see that one, I think, has increased in elevation by a number of feet, which changes the flow of the property down below, which requires more fill. I also understand that the maximum you can build out there is 2 stories high. So I don't think we want to be seeing a lot of rooftops from the roads if they build at the bottom. I guess the other thing that you brought up, Mr. Chalmers, is that if I recall, driveways can have a maximum of 15% grade so that emergency vehicles can get up and down, which on some of those lots, if they didn't build them up, would not be able to be completed. So I guess my question is a pretty simple one, is at some point in time between what we have out there and what the elevations of some properties are, we're going to have to find some type of situation where maybe we aren't going to find a maximum or a minimum. It's going to have to be based on some other criteria, and I'm not sure what that is.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Craddock, I believe that's a fairly fair assessment of the situation we're in for this number of lots that we've described. Going forward, we would be pinning the elevations of the roads, and we would be pinning the elevations of the building envelopes and the driveways and some other things through the development permit. That's the ambition. So again, we do see this as an interim an interim approach to this number of lots. And I'll just make really clear, it's not that the approvals were made in error or that there was anything wrong. We're just looking at an enhancement of the process over what existed in the past, and that's in response to council's guidelines. But I would generally concur that on a number of lots, certainly there's going to be a need for retention. There's no defying that. And if we were to choose to not to retain, I believe the point you were making about driveway grades and negative slope driveways and other things would create other considerations that would need to be taken into account and other building challenges. Just one final comment that I meant to include in my report, so hopefully you'll indulge me, is that we're dealing specifically with retaining walls. There are some other building height implications as well, because the building height calculations in some jurisdictions, and it doesn't seem to be the problem here, one of the workarounds has been to extend the foundation wall heights. And if we look at the spirit of the guidelines, if grade elevations were being made up by foundation walls rather than retaining walls or a combination of retaining walls and foundation walls, it's again not the most aesthetically appealing approach in my opinion. So some hybrid between the two is usually a softer, gentler approach to making up those grades. And so yeah, I generally concur with what Councillor Craddock said, that there are other considerations that could be impacted for sure, should retaining walls not be permitted over a certain height.
Thank you. More questions? Councillor Noble.
So if we send the zoning bylaw for review and amendment, would there be any way to expedite the current applications so that their building plans aren't held up more than needed?
Mr. Mayor, we have spoken quite extensively with the two applications that have appeared before Board of Variance, and they're certainly aware of this session, and I believe they both made representation by letter, and I believe they're probably following this quite closely. There's kind of two options, depending on what council, should council choose to send us away. We would start the work immediately, and we'd look at the relative timing of having the zoning amendment done versus the development variance permit process, which is still an option that's available to them, and it could be entertained by council should the zoning amendments take longer. So we would be in a position to lay out both of those options to the applicants and have them make the decision whether the choice, whether they wanted to wait for a zoning amendment or they wanted to pursue a development variance permit, whichever they felt might be faster or better suit their needs. I'll just close with this. We do know the time pressures. We're sensitive to those, but this was an important issue that we felt warranted a specific council and committee of the whole direction before we went one way or the other.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if I'm not seeing any more questions, I'll open the floor for comments and discussion. One. Councillor Craddock, get us going, then Councillor Antonelli.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. I guess the way I take a look at it, we are going to find a solution to this problem. We have no choice. The 1.2 meter no longer fits what we're looking for on hillside development. I think Mr. Chalmers has put it out pretty clearly that we have to take a look at how we're going to do this. And I believe over the next period of time, we're going to get that done. In the meantime, and I think we're probably looking at a number of months before it comes back to us, seeing how this is our last meeting this month. We got one in January, then we start budget. So I'm not sure they'll get it done by the end of March, which is the next building season. So I think for me, Cerulean Drive is the issue basically that's before us right now. The other lots are not opened up for building at this time, which I suspect they would be in line for the new bylaw that would be coming out in March. So in the meantime, I don't want to hold up development. I don't want to hold up people that are taking a look at putting their life on hold for the next 6 months or maybe longer. So I want this review to take place, but in the meantime, knowing in my mind the council is going to come up with something that's going to be positive for everybody, I would like to see us move forward with the applications that are before us. I think I would like to see the 2 stop orders revoked. And let's work with the community to get this done in a reasonable manner.
Thank you, Councillor Craddock. Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, well, I would like to see moving forward the developer take more responsibility for ensuring the lots are readily buildable. You know, what I've read in the letters was that people were looking into lots and then they would inquire about what the retaining would cost. And he didn't give a price, but I'm sure it's $50,000 or $100,000. So I think that really cuts into the affordability for homeowners, and that should really be something that's taken on by the developer, not you know, families in Pemberton who are trying to build themselves an affordable home. I'm definitely in support of looking at this and looking at it quickly. I have in mind all those people who have bought lots and might be renting right now while they're waiting, you know, for their permits to come through and whatnot. So I'd like to see this done quickly. At the same time, I don't want to set up an expectation that using large retaining walls to build big flat areas is acceptable. I still want to see step foundations and terraced yards. And I also don't want to rely on screening to hide large retaining walls. I think we really want to be sympathetic and make this work for the owners, but I don't want to see lots of large retaining walls. And lastly, you know, in the correspondence, we saw that there's some confusion in the write-up on the website about how all this is handled, and I hope that's quickly clarified.
Thank you. Councillor Noble, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I definitely would support a review and amendment of this zoning bylaw to make things more workable for people out there. And whatever we can do to expedite the 2 stop work orders that are currently in place because of these issues, I think we should do what we can to that end.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
Thanks very much, Mayor Russom. Just a follow-up question to Mr. Chalmers, if you don't mind. We have retaining walls that we're all a little concerned about and the way they look and how we can green them up. So explain to me, retaining walls at the present time aren't allowed over 1.2 meters. But talk to me about the earth fill lot where they're allowed to build with a 2-to-1 slope. Do they require a permit?
Mayor Richmond, through not that would be considered as part of the building permit. They don't require a specific approval for the retaining wall, which by definition is a more vertical structure. So again, there are different ways to make up grade, and it really varies. Sometimes it's cost driven. People would prefer a sloped yard. Sometimes people would like to see a flatter spot on their yard, or they need to retain because of the soil conditions. There's a whole host of things that lead to the different decisions on how an individual lot is graded. And it's almost impossible to come up with a one-size-fits-all in terms of that approach. But we can certainly look at that as an option, the greening of it as well. And I believe some of the comments that were made earlier are outstanding about, you know, council's preference to try and look at that as a solution that's more necessary than the default.
And if I can just follow up with that, I guess the reason I'm asking that question, it seems the 2 lots that have stop work orders on them that have actually retaining walls, in between there's a lot that was earth filled and approved by an engineer, but it didn't have any issues with it, but it's basically the same height at the very top as what the retaining wall would be. The only disadvantage is on a 2-to-1 slope, they lost 10 feet of their property going 20 feet high. So I kind of shake my head and think, well, yeah, they lost 10 feet of property, but the guy next door built the same height, but it doesn't make sense to me. So I guess I'm trying to understand that, Mr. Chalmers.
Mr. Mayor, through you, I think the only thing I can say is personal preference and whether that's driven by cost. Some people prefer to not have a manicured yard versus others that do. You know, there is an element of consumer choice here that I think is at play. And there's not a one size fits all necessarily that's going to apply to all those. What this will do, if we proceed with the zoning amendment, is it will give us the ability to allow the retention to happen where it's necessary. And in some cases, necessary may be driven as much by desire and market choice as it is by, you know, typically it's not required for the building foundation retention. We are talking about things to retain the yard. There are, and I will close with this, there are some challenges sometimes with steep slopes that are done in an earthen manner and their stability. Now they do get signed off by an engineer, I would believe, but there are some merits to retention there when it comes to properly built retaining walls versus steep slopes, which can be subject to erosion and other things if they're not properly constructed and maintained over time.
Thank you, Mr. Chalmers.
Any other questions from the committee? You have something to add, Ms. Gilmore?
I just wanted to make a comment, informing the committee that we actually only have one stop work order left. One of the lots did not impact the actual construction of the house. The retention, it was to more level out the backyard and to allow for access to the back. So with the one stop work order that we have, if they don't have the retention, they can't build the house. So unfortunately, we cannot allow that one to proceed unless they have a variance or unless we've changed our zoning bylaw, because they're so tied together. The other one is still proceeding and the construction is going. We removed the stop work order once we realized that.
So thank you for that, Ms. Gilmore. That's kind of where I was going to go. I'm hearing general support from the committee to have staff start a review of an amendment, removing the maximum height and looking at screening and step back and other options. So I'll be looking for a motion to that effect in a moment. But with regards to the properties that are either, you know, again, we'll go in order here. There were two properties. The one property that's a stop order. There's no choice but with the way things are written now for them to continue through the variance process. Is that not correct at this point? Or not to continue? If they want to carry on working right now, we can't just revoke without going through the variance process. Is that not right? Okay. And when would we expect to see that variance?
Mr. Mayor, through you, we have not received any development variance permit applications yet. I believe several options, and I might defer to Ms. Fraser, but in order to get this started faster, this will be a committee of the whole recommendation that will need ratification by council. I suppose should you pass a resolution, you could amend tonight's agenda to add it and deal with it as a council body, giving us the council direction tonight. If we are following generally what we've outlined in the staff report, which seems to be what I'm hearing, I don't know that a development variance permit would be faster necessarily than the zoning bylaw amendment. And if it is, it might be by a matter of days or weeks. And so whether the applicants want to incur the cost in the processing of the development variance permit is something that perhaps if the committee of the whole and council will indulge us, we will work with the applicants to determine which will be the most efficient option for them, and they can make their own decision. But there's nothing precluding them from making the DVP application if they choose to deal with it individually. That will be up to them. But based on what we're hearing, I don't know that it will take us much beyond the next council meeting to have an amendment prepared.
Ms. Fraser?
Through the mayor, yes, we would, if the committee makes a recommendation this afternoon, we would bring it forward and it would come under business arising from the committee of the whole meeting from this afternoon. So we could get that resolution from council if they're agreeable to do that.
Okay. So would somebody like to make a motion to have staff, to recommend to council that staff undertake a review of the zoning bylaw with regards to retaining walls and retention?
Make that motion.
Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Craddock. Further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
I'm not sure I want it to be a friendly amendment, but is there any way, Mr. Chalmers said that the people that the only stop work order at the present time, to my understanding, that it probably wouldn't be any quicker to go with the variance, that they might just as well wait, and planning department should be able to bring this forward for the next meeting. I just want to make sure that's what I understood correctly.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. I mean, we do have to do the work and there are the holidays, but I believe that this is a fairly priority matter. And the linguistics of the zoning amendment are not going to be so that substantial, and the body of the report is largely done. What I think would be best is we will present the owners with the options, whichever option they choose. And I believe if they're not viewing today's meeting, we'll direct them to view it online and to understand where council's direction is. There seems to be a strong willingness to work with them, and we will express that to them and give them the option.
Thank you very much.
Further discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Councillor Noble.
I would like to see it include some mandatory landscaping requirements.
I think that's included there, right?
Okay.
It's in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Calling the question, all in favor, opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Chalmers, Ms. Virginie. We'll be seeing you later. Okay, we're going to go on to the Pemberton District Initiative Fund Community Group 2020 reports. So, we had all the presentations at the PVIS meeting the other day. Maybe Ms. Fraser, for Councillor Antonelli's benefit, who wasn't there, and anybody in attendance, would you like to give an overview of what we're doing here?
Sure. So as council or the committee will recall, we entered into a new program for funding local community groups. We disbanded the Community Initiative and Opportunity Fund, and the regional district disbanded the Pemberton and District Community Fund. And we've merged them into local service areas, which is now the Pemberton and District Initiative Fund. Both the SLRD Area C and the Village of Pemberton are requisitioned for funding to sit in those pots. And they've just we've identified, or through this process, identified 2 funds within the PDIF, as it's called. One for arts, culture, and recreation, which is a requisition bylaw that requisitions $75,000 a year. And then a second bylaw that is for economic development, and it requisitions $50,000 a year. So all of the community groups that were provided an opportunity, or that had been formally funded through either the Community Initiative and Opportunity Fund, which in most cases was matched or jointly supported by the SLRD Area C Directors Amenity Funds, were given the opportunity to reapply for this new program and seek funding agreements that would be anywhere from a one-time funding to a 3-year short-term agreement, which would see funding be reduced each year, or a 5-year agreement, which is what had been previously in place. So at the Pemberton and District, or at the Pemberton Valley Utilities and Services Committee meeting held last week, all of the community groups were asked to come. There were 2 elements to some presentations. One was to report out on the work that they did the previous year, or in 2020, because they received funding through this program in 2020. And then subsequently to make a request for continued funding, either through one-time short-term agreement or a long-term agreement. So looking at the 2 funds, we had the Chamber of Commerce come and make a presentation. They had a 1-year transitional funding agreement in 2020, where they received $20,000. For $8,000 was for the operation of the Chamber Information Center, and $12,000 was to support the economic, or their executive director position, new executive director position. So they reported out on the work that they did in 2020, and they made application for funding to move forward on a long-term agreement, 5-year agreement, for an amount of $27,500, which would cover the Visitor Information Center and the executive director's position. Tourism Pemberton also made application. They reported out on 2000.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to give, so what we're going to, Ms. Fraser's taken us through the presentations and the applications. We'll talk about them as a whole and individually. I just want to make sure, Councilor Antonelli, if you have any questions about any of the groups in particular, maybe just put your hand up now. So if there's information that you're looking for on each one of these groups, and then we'll get into the whole numbers of it. So if there's anything on Chamber's request right now, maybe ask for it. We had the opportunity to ask some of these questions the other day. So I just want to make sure that if you have any specific questions, you can ask them now. Go ahead.
I've read through the packages, so I feel like I'm up to speed.
Okay, perfect.
Karen, thanks.
Do you want me to proceed? Okay, so Tourism Pemberton has previously received $8,000, and going forward, their agreement through Kioff ended this year. This was their last year, and they have come in with a request for $50,000 to continue their work. Pemberton Farmers Market had a 1-year transitional agreement where they received $6,000, and they have sought a 3-year agreement for $6,000 going forward. And then we did in 2020 allocate funding, or the committee did allocate funding out for the Pemberton and District Economic Collaboration or Collaborative group for $2,500, which basically covered administrative costs. And we haven't received any indication whether they would be seeking funding to.
If I can, Ms. Fraser, that's actually, can you hear me any better?
A little bit.
A little bit. That was included in the Chamber's ask.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it was.
Perfect. So there you go. It's incorporated. So that is the economic development component of the project. So at this point last year, there was a total $36,500 that was allocated, which does leave a rollover amount. And this year, the request is $83,500 for, which is basically for $50,000 pot, plus a little extra money, $12,000 that was uncommitted from last year. So that's the economic development. For the arts, recreation, and culture, the Wellness Almanac ended up receiving funding through that program. And they are a bit of a unique entity because they don't actually have a home, but we worked out a workaround so that funding would flow through the village to be able to support the continued work, because certainly Area C Director Mac and Council both agreed that this was an important initiative to keep going. So there's a funding request for continued funding for that. The Pemberton Canoe Association has submitted a seed funding agreement, and they are looking for funding to help support coaching. And that's $5,500 for this year, $36,000 for the next year, and $2,400 for the following year. The Pemberton Animal Wellness Society received funding in 2020 of $7,500. They did not make application for funding in 2021 or going forward. The Arts Council has asked for the same amount that they've been receiving in previous years, is $8,000. Winterfest has money left over that they received for this year because Winterfest didn't happen and won't be happening in 2021. They didn't make application for 2021, and they're hoping that they can utilize the funds that are in place for programming for, I guess it would be for 2022. Porca's looking at their, they have one more year in their key-off agreement of their short-term agreement, seed funding agreement of $47.40 for 2021. Pemberton BMX is seeking $5,500 for a continued, they have a 1-year agreement still, one more year in their original 5-year agreement. We've allocated, or the committee has allocated $5,000 on a yearly basis to the fire department to support the fireworks. And we had a new application from Spud Valley Nordics for $3,000 one-time funding to support uniform purchase. The Pemberton Cemetery Committee has requested additional one-time funding of $5,000 to support the continuation of the enhancements out there. And that is it for 2021. So at the end of the day, out of a $75,000 pot, there's $46,370 in requested funds. And where we are right now is because council wanted to participate in this process, or at least provide some guidance to the PVIS members. The council members attended the PVIS meeting, heard the presentations, and now it's come back to the committee of the whole for council to have, or the committee to have a discussion and make recommendation to council, which would then be forwarded to PVIS. I think that's it. Anything else, Your Worship?
No, thanks very much. Any, so actually, when we look at the $46,000 request out of 75, does that include the late, so for the ability for people to apply for one-offs? Is that the $20,000 in there?
Yes, no, 46,000 is what has been allocated, and then that whatever is left over.
Okay.
If there were one-off, we do know we have been approached by Pemberton Secondary School. They're trying to complete their outdoor education classroom project, and so we were anticipating that they would try to get an application in, but they couldn't meet the deadline. So it's likely that we'll receive a one-time funding request from them. So yes, this does give opportunity for one-time funding requests to come in over the year.
Because that was just for reference, that was important to the committee when we put this fund together, was to make sure we do this funding intake once a year, but that there was the ability for spontaneity and being flexible, so that there is funds left in there.
And certainly in the previous year under the Economic Development Fund, there was a little bit left over of about $12,000. And there, unfortunately this year, based on the request, depending on how they get allocated out, there wouldn't be any money left over in economic development. But there's certainly money left over in recreation, or the arts, culture, and recreation.
So the idea here is to have a discussion. We can discuss, you know, some of them on an individual basis, so that council can make its preferences known when Councillor Zant and I go back to PVIS to discuss this further. So I'll open it up here in a second to either particular ones, but one of the questions or some of the input requested was, we have a bit of a surplus. Does that surplus go into the fund to build up the fund? Is it potentially used for the over prescription on the economic fund? So those will be considerations for council to send back to PVIS as well. So with that, I will open it up for discussion. Councillor Noble.
I'd definitely like to support the one-time ask by the Spud Valley Nordics. I think that's a group that gives a lot to the community and doesn't ask much, and they'll get a lot of mileage out of these funds.
Okay, so how about this? I mean, I don't want to assume anything, but I feel like some of these asks are a little easier. Some of them are already in the works because they're, you know, multi-year funding. It's really the increased requests that we have to look at here, and the one that and the new ones. So do we want to sort of do what Councillor Noble just did, Ms. Fraser, to send back to PVIS and just have a list of the ones supporting as is, or how do you want to do it?
I think that might be the easiest thing, if you know which ones that, if the committee is agreeable to, and decides which ones they want to support. It may be that you, the committee wishes to have more conversation about some of the requests, or you could potentially provide guidance to PVIS suggesting that more conversation take place at the PVIS table. But I think in fairness to the community groups that everybody's in agreement on, if the committee is able to make a recommendation to council on definitely which ones, and I think that'll help the conversation move forward.
Okay, so let's, thank you. Let's try to create a list of the ones that, as you say, we can definitely, or we're willing to definitely move on, and then we can put those on one motion. Is that fair? Okay, Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, I think at this point, taking a look at the presentations and the dollar value, the people that have applied under arts, culture, and recreation I would be happy to say to the yourself and Councillor Zant that we could approve those right off the bat. That would take all of those off the table right now.
Okay, that's a good call. Has anybody got any thoughts on that? Anybody support that direction? Okay. Well, let's do that in two motions then. So for the Arts and Council applications, a motion for the committee to council to support all the current applications in the arts, culture, and recreation funding stream.
I'll move
Yep.
it.
Councillor Caddick, second by Councillor Noble, all in favor, opposed, motion carries. And then when we move up to the economic development, we only have a few applications, but we are obviously oversubscribed. So once again, I'll open it to the committee. Councillor Caddick.
Thank you very much, Mayor Richmond. I guess for me, it's a small item, but under the Chamber of Commerce, they've asked for $2,500 for economic development secretarial service. I just want to be maybe through Ms. Gilmore, that wraps up next year, does it not? It's a 2-year agreement for funding. So would that be just a one-time issue rather than an ongoing at 27.5?
Yes, it should be complete by the end of, it should be completed by the end of next year, at least halfway through, I think, 2021.
Yeah, that's what our plan is with that. So I'm just wondering, like the 27.5 ask, I don't have a problem with that, but what that means basically is Area C in the village of Pemberton is paying the lion's share of the $3,000 a year. We did have some input from Little Wet Nation last year and some from the chamber, but I just want to point that out. So next year at this time, hopefully that won't be there any longer. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you very much. The only other comment, Mayor Richmond, if you don't mind, is I'm having a real issue with Tourism Pemberton and the dollar value they're looking for. I really didn't see an awful lot in their presentation that outlined how they're going to use that money. And it certainly is taking up a huge amount of the dollars that are available there.
And so, and the chamber, you said you were supportive of that, and Pemberton Farmers Market, that's a.
Correct.
Okay. Further comments? Go ahead, Councillor Noble.
I share the concerns about the Tourism Pemberton ask and not having a lot of concrete goals and objectives with that.
Councillor Antonelli, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think I also have that concern. I think that there's a lot of merit to what they want to do. But I think perhaps this would be a good year to provide them with funding to develop their program more, as opposed to just giving a large pot of money for some outcomes we're not quite certain on. Yeah, so I think, it's valuable, but I'd like to see a little bit more detail. And this is a good opportunity to fund some time from a coordinator or something along those lines to develop the budget a little bit more.
Thank you. Quick question, and then I'll make my comments. I'm not sure where to place this. So there's been an ongoing conversation, as you know, about opening Nairn Falls Gate. We were putting a letter together. I've made some calls. Mr. Mendonca from Tourism Pemberton has been active on this, Mr. Shands, et cetera. All that to say, we have some buy-in from BC Parks on this. We got a response late, or I didn't get a response. Mr. Mendonca sent it my way from BC Parks saying they would be willing to work with our community to find a way to keep it open. They don't have a budget to do any of the work, so the funds to either clear it and keep it safe would have to come from somewhere else. So they've asked to sort of flush out some of the details. They've asked for a meeting with Tourism Pemberton, Mr. Mendonca, Spud Valley Nordics, et cetera, Mr. Shrans, to sort of, again, flush out those details and see how that could work. The reason I'm bringing that up right now is that I don't know if there was talk about funds potentially for that being included in this ask. Is that the case, Ms. Gilmore?
Yes,
Mr.
it's
Prisoner?
actually, if you go to page 100 of the SLRD report, you'll see the proposed budget and destination development, which is Nairn Falls plowing, cross-country ski tracks and recreation, sort of under one line item, is $4,500.
So I just wanted to flag that for us when we're considering a dollar amount. I think there's general concern over the increased ask. I agree with the rest of council that a 525% increase is too much with not enough direct spend on it. I also do want to say, I mean, Tourism Pemberton does important work for our community and our business community. I don't want to lose sight of that fact. Tourism is, as we know, a huge part of our economy. But with that said, I don't know that the $50,000 had direct spending and outcomes that that would justify using about 80% of our whole grant and aid stream for economic development. So as we're grappling with a number, if that's what we're about to do, I just wanted to flag the snow clearing because we might want to sort of have that conversation on the side and not include it right away in their dollar amount. So last year, for instance, we funded them up to $8,000. So I'm going to ask the committee what kind of number we're looking at recommending to PEVIS we would be happy to support, and then whether we want to add that snow clearing on top of that. So I hope that made sense. It was a little bit rambling. Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense, Mayor Richmond. And actually, I'm wondering, because this is a test year, we don't know how it's going to go. I would love to see that Nairn Falls winter cleanup, so to speak, as a separate line item, and that we fund it separately and agree to that to you and Councillor Zant bringing that forward rather than in their budget. And that way going forward, we would have a better idea. I know Mr. Mendoca has been great in pulling this forward along with Danny, and I appreciate all their work. So I would certainly like to see us agree to fund that amount out of the total budget rather than out of the Tourism Pemberton ask.
Ms. Fraser?
I'm just wondering on that note, whether that would be something that would align with the arts, recreation and culture pot, if it's going to be funded separately as a local government contribution through that pot, because it aligns.
That's a good thought, Ms. Gilmore.
I think the challenge too is, although it's been in the policy, I guess, realistically, one group is only supposed to be eligible for one pot and not multiple pots. So that the PEVIS committee could decide to think, okay, well, this is a trial and we're going to include it in there. It's going to go to Tourism Pemberton and consider them separately, but it will come up, I'm sure. I just wanted to throw that out.
I was thinking more along of just separating it out altogether and creating its own thing like we do with the fire department.
Yeah.
It's still going to Tourism Pemberton though.
It wouldn't be.
I'm going to let you guys figure out these really, really important complexities. I kind of agree with Ms. Fraser. I think it does belong more in arts and culture.
I agree.
And if we can figure out a way between both our staff to do that, great. If not, we could look at keeping.
Well, maybe it's an individual that it gets, there's one active individual that's really quite keen at doing this and has helped us out in the past with, 1 mile plowing. So maybe we could take that back and have a conversation for how to submit to qualify under two different programs.
So with all that, let me ask of the rest of the committee, would they be supportive of a motion to council to say to PEVIS that we would support up to $5,000 for snow clearing and maintenance of Nairn Falls during the winter months, and that staff figure out where that comes out of? Is that, are we happy to go that direction? Councillor Craddock, you have a comment?
Thank you very much. I don't want to be short, and we never know what the year's like. I know some years with snow plowing, even in the community, it can be 80 to 100,000. Some years 40,000. I don't want to be over budget, but I'd be happy to go to $5,500 for the first year, and anything that's not used is returned, because depending on who does that work, I know a lot of times if it's Danny, for instance, he does a lot of work around 1 Mile Lake. on a volunteer basis, and it might at least pay for some of the costs of him doing that type of thing.
So would you like to make a motion to everything else I said up to 5,500 and unexpended will go back into the fund?
Thank you very much. I'll move that motion.
Councillor Caddick, seconded by Councillor Noble. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And so that was part of the $50,000 ask. So essentially, we've just removed 5,000 from that. Again, we funded them $8,000 last year. Who wants to start the conversation with what they're willing to support Tourism Pemberton, or what? Not what they're willing. What we feel is a solid number to help them with their work this year. Councillor Caddick.
Well, I think that we have two members on that committee. We'll just throw it back to you two to figure it out. Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Thanks. Somebody else like to start the conversation? Councillor Antonelli.
I would say if we're looking at this as seed funding to further develop the budget and look at programming and that kind of thing, I would suggest rather than a 525% increase, maybe 100% increase. And that would definitely allow for some consulting and budget development, and really, you know, show some appreciation for the amount of work that they're doing and how valuable it is. But also make sure we have the level of accountability that I think the public expects.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Or would you like to make a, go ahead, Councillor Caddick?
Yeah, just through Council Antonelli, what amount would that be? Would that be $20,000 or $25,000? I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Be 16.
Would be 16.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 8,000 now, another 8,000 on top of that. And certainly there should be room for developing the program and the budget.
And to be clear, on top of that is the Nairn Falls 5,500.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Fraser?
So by doubling the Tourism Pemberton contribution and including the Pemberton Farmers Market, as well as the Chamber ask at 27.5, that puts you at 49,500, which is just short of the whole pot.
That's short of the whole yearly pot, not including any carryover, correct?
Yeah, and as Mr. Haywood pointed out at the PVIS meeting, one of the challenges is you don't want to necessarily be reliant on the carryover, because every year the carryover may not. So the carryover that we've got for 2021 is really one time, which actually could facilitate the Nairn Falls activities for sure.
I agree with that, Ms. Fraser. I think we're trying to build a fund that supports some ongoing and some continuing services to our community, and that demand will continue to grow for this fund. And we want to support it yearly. I think if we can hopefully have a little bit left over and we have a reserve, that is for those awesome one-time events that weren't budgeted for, and we want to keep something in the pot for that.
Mhm.
So, that's correct.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll make a motion that we approve the three items we just talked about, so that the total fund dispensed would be $49,500.
We approved the other two already, didn't we? Or
Not yet.
no? Okay. So a motion to approve 27.5 for Pemberton District Chamber, 16 for Tourism Pemberton, 6,000 for the Pemberton Farmers Market as laid out in the report. Moved by Councillor Caddick, seconded by Councillor Noble. Further discussion on the question? On favor? Opposed? Carries. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
So we'll be bringing those forward to regular for council to endorse.
Yeah, and just so I don't know if there's anybody on the line from this group, so will we then council hopefully endorse them tonight. We'll see how you're feeling, and if so, they go to our PVIS early in January, later our board meeting the middle of January, and then funds can be confirmed at that point. Okay. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Antonelli, second by Councillor Noble, all in favor, opposed, motion carries. So we're going to just pause here for a second and go in camera. Does anybody need a little break before going back?
Yes, we're ready to go, Mayor.
Okay, I will call to order a regular council meeting number 1529 for Tuesday, December 8th. And in honor of the Liwatul, the village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Liwat Nation. This meeting of council is being held virtually with all meeting participants attending via electronic communications in order to adhere to the provincial health officer's orders respecting physical distancing requirements as a measure to prevent COVID-19 transmission. Council members will be involved in and participate in the meeting virtually as they would in person. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Council members attending the meeting are required to verbally advise the chair of when they leave the meeting and return to the meeting so that this can be recorded in the minutes. For clarity, if a council member does not verbally advise the chair but is observed to be absent from their video feed for an extended period of time and their video feed remains turned on, and it is unclear to staff whether they are present in the meeting, the council member will be marked absent from the meeting until such time as staff observes the council member to reappear in the video feed. Members of the public who wish to ask questions during open question period at the end of the meeting will be able to do so, and I will provide instructions at the time. So with that, are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting 1527 from Tuesday, November 17th, moved by Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Antonelli. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes from special council meeting number 1528, November 30th, moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the previous meeting? Rise with report from in camera. So council is rising with report from the in camera meeting number 1527 held on November 17th, at which the contract in the amount of $1,174,400, excluding GST, for the Sports Field number 2 project was awarded to Cedar Crest Lands BC Limited. You have a list of the appointments. So, good evening, Councillor Zant. Do you have a list of the appointments, Ms. Fraser, that we were rising a report from the ALUC Advisory Design Review Commission and Board of Variance?
Yes, I sent them to you by email just now.
Okay, let me just grab that.
And also the committee of the whole rise with report is in your inbox as well.
Okay, so here we go. This is from Tuesday, December 8th, our meeting earlier today. So the first coming from the committee, the whole is with regards to hillside development and retaining walls. Pardon?
I think you need to do the advisory planning
Okay.
appointments first because you're still in.
All right, yeah,
Working
so
in
open
camera.
our email.
Your worship.
Yeah, got it. So, rise report from in camera, November 17th, the recreation soccer field, and then the Advisory Land Use Commission, that Nick Fisher and Jeanette Elmore are appointed to the Advisory Land Use Commission for a 2-year term to expire in December 2022, and that Richard Knott and Alison Twiss are reappointed to the Advisory Land Use Commission for a 2-year term to expire in December 2022. That the Advisory Design Review Committee, that Christina Patterson-Salin is appointed to the ADRC for a 2-year term to expire in 2022, and that Brian Dorgello is reappointed to the ADRC for a 2-year period to expire in December 2022. And Board of Variance, that Drew Meredith is reappointed to the Board of Variance for a 3-year term to expire December 2023. That Phil Reed and Tom Fitzgerald are appointed to the Board of Variance, each for a 3-year term to expire December 2023. And that letters of thanks be sent to outgoing members of the commissions and Board of Variance. Council would like to thank Nikki Van Kirk, Alan LeBlanc, Kevin Clark, and Ali Shield for volunteering their time to participate and advise council. These are important groups, and we always manage to get really great people on it. So thanks to everybody that serve on those groups. Sorry, I gotta change screens. So do we need a motion to that effect?
No.
Okay.
You will need a motion for the next ones, rising with report from committee of the whole.
Yeah. And so next, rise with report committee of the whole from earlier this afternoon. regarding hillside development retaining walls, that staff be directed to undertake a review and amendment process to the Village of Pemberton zoning bylaw 832 to address retaining wall provisions. You want to do these separately, Ms. Fraser? I can't see you, so you'll have to. Speak.
Yes, sorry, yes, please.
Okay, so can I get a motion to that effect, please? And I'm not on the Zoom screen, so if you could just say your name.
Yeah.
I think that was Councillor Noble, seconded by
Ted,
Councillor Antonelli. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And then Pemberton District Initiative Fund. That the PVIS committee be advised that the following requests for funding under the Pemberton District Initiative Fund Arts, Culture, and Recreation funding stream are supported by council in the following amounts. Wellness Almanac to $12,000, Pemberton Canoe Club $5,500, Pemberton Arts and Culture Council $8,000, Pemberton Off-Road Cycling Association $4,740, BMX Society $5,500, Pemberton Fireworks Display $5,000, Spud Valley Nordic Association $3,000, and Pemberton Cemetery Committee for $5,000, and that the request for funding for snow clearing and maintenance at Nairn Falls be supported under either the Pemberton and District Initiative Fund, Arts, Culture, and Recreation funding stream, or the Economic Development Fund up to the amount of $5,500, with the expended funds returned to the PDIF. And you want to do all this all at once?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, I gotta go back. And that PVIS community be advised that the following requests for funding under the Pemberton District Initiative Fund Economic Development Service funding stream are supported by council in the following amounts. Pemberton District Chamber of Commerce $27,500, Tourism Pemberton $16,000, Pemberton Farmers Market $6,000. Can I please get a motion to that effect? Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And just to be clear for anybody in attendance that might be listening, that was funding supported by council. Those recommendations will go to the PVIS committee, where that discussion will then take place to be ratified by the board. Okay. Committee minutes, none. Delegation, none. Reports. We're at the office of the CAO. Ms. Gilmore.
I don't have anything to say this evening.
Crazy. All right then. Corporate Legislative Services. Notice on title 1350 Greenwood Street. Ms. Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight I am here to make a request to get authorization or support to put a notice on title 15 at 1350 Greenwood Street. The purpose of this report is to recommend the filing of a notice on title on the property at 1350 Greenwood Street, which is legally described as Lot 30, District Lot 2705, Plan Cap 76833. A notice on title provides advice to potential purchasers that unauthorized, uninspected construction has taken place on the site, and the purchaser should investigate the matter to determine to their own satisfaction whether or not they wish to proceed with the purchase of the property. If the property owner does correct the contravention to the satisfaction of the village, the notice can be discharged. The statutory process for considering a notice on title establishes that notice must be given to the property owner, that the matter is being considered by council, and provides an opportunity for the property owner to be heard on this matter. The property owner in this regard was provided notice, and they have declined to be heard at this point. To summarize the background, in 2018, the village issued a building permit for a single-family home with suite. The suite was built first and subsequently occupied without an occupancy permit. At the time an occupancy permit was sought, review of the building permit determined that the home did not conform to the village's zoning bylaw, as the suite was in fact a carriage house and not connected to the main residence. This could be rectified by connecting the main house to the suite by way of a conditioned space, and the building would be compliant with the zoning bylaw. However, in discussions with the property owner and the contractors, this would be very costly to accomplish based on the design of the house and would impact the energy efficiency the owners were expecting to achieve through this type of building that they were undertaking, passive house building they were undertaking. The owners, through their agents, were provided two options to address the non-compliance, which included redesigning the home to comply, which, as noted above, is costly, or agree to the issuance of a Section 57 notice on title. In correspondence to the staff, the property owners wish to convey to council that they did not intentionally or deliberately set out to contravene the village bylaws. But given the cost to redesign the home, the property owners have elected to agree to a notice on title. So they're not disputing the direction that the village is going. As such, the building inspector has put forth a recommendation to have a Section 57 notice on title placed on title, and is seeking council support respecting the recommendation, which is in the report to council that I have provided you today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I do have our building official, I believe. Yes, Chris Bren, our building official, is on the panel right now. So if there's any questions related to the building side of it, he is here to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Questions? Any questions for staff? Been through this a couple times. Councillor Zant, did you have something?
Yeah, Mayor Richmond, I was just going to say, I mean, by the sounds of the staff report and from the owners, I'd almost say it sounds like everybody's agreeable to what staff's presented. So if there's no other questions, I'd make the motion for the recommendation.
Okay, do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Further discussion on the motion. So the motion is, well, first of all, let's start by receiving the report. So Councillor Zant, motion to receive the report from the CLO.
Motion to receive.
Seconded by Councillor Noble. In favor, opposed, motion carries. And now a motion that the corporate officer be directed to file a notice in the land title office stating that a resolution relating to the land has been made under Section 57 of the community charter, and further information respecting the resolution may be inspected at the Village of Pemberton Municipal Hall. Moved by Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor
Zant.
All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Fraser.
Thank you very much, council.
So we'll just give it a moment for Ms. Martin to join us. Okay, so good evening, Ms. Martin. We're on to finance, and we're looking at the 2021-2025 five-year financial plan schedule. Ms. Martin,
Good evening to Mayor and Council. I'm here this evening to discuss or to present to Council the proposed five-year financial plan budget timeline for scheduling purposes. Our timeline is for review and consideration by Council and is in alignment to meet our deadlines, our provincial deadlines to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to have our tax deadline in for May 15th. In order to meet these deadlines, we've proposed a schedule following Council's already approved schedule for 2021. This starts with our first review of budgets on February 2nd of 2021 and completes around March 16th. So it gives us 6 weeks. We meet every 2 weeks and review budgets and taxes as our revised roll comes into play. And we'll have 6 weeks to review budgets for 2021. And then on March 16th, we will also review the five-year financial plan bylaw draft, which gives us a 5-year budget view. This schedule also meets with the current schedule without any additional committee of the whole meetings. However, we have the opportunity within those 6 weeks to add special meetings or special CAL meetings if it is determined that council would like more time to discuss. Is there any questions?
questions?
Questions.
Any thoughts on that? Okay, well, if we're good with it as presented, then I would look for a motion that council approve the 5-year financial plan schedule as presented. Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Noble. Further discussion? All in favor? Is that an all in favor, Councillor Antonelli, or is that discussion? Okay, call the question. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Martin. We're going to go on to development services. So wait for some more staff to join. All right, we're on to development services. It's the development variance permit number 124 for 1368 Fernwood Drive. Welcome back, Mr. Chalmers and Ms. Pedrini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Council. The report before you this evening is for consideration of development variance permit number 124. The property is located at 1368 Fernwood Drive. And this application has been before Council before. The resolution that Council passed at that time is in the staff report. The variance comes out of an application for subdivision approval to create 3 new lots with a residential remainder on a 1.17 acre or 0.47 hectare property at the end of Fernwood Drive, as we know it now. This application was submitted in April of this year, and it was seeking largely at the time some road variances as well as a building setback. At the time Council considered this application, there were a number of other comments that Council raised that have been considered by the applicants. Staff did meet with the applicants to go through each of the Council's individual comments, and the applicants have prepared a response which staff are conveying to you this evening. Just really briefly, snow clearing, drainage, setback on the house, impacts to neighbors, snow storage, and pedestrian connectivity were the items referenced by Council at their meeting of May 26th. So in preparing the response from the applicant, there's a kind of 2 classes of comments here that we're dealing with. Some of them were germane exactly or directly to the development variance request, and some of them were other requests of the applicant. So as to the first part, so there was a resubmitted engineering drawing and road cross section for the proposed road variances. That's summarized in a table in the staff report. So effectively, the subdivision development control bylaw standard for road right-of-way width is 18 meters, and the requested variance is to reduce that by 3 meters to 15 meters. To reduce the asphalt carriageway width from 8.1 meters to 7.5 meters. To reduce the lane width from 3.3 meters to 3.0 meters. And to reduce the ditch width from 3.6 to 2 meters. Just a note on the road variances, those have been reviewed by the village engineering consultant and staff internally, and it is an acceptable degree of variance subject to the final engineering drawing submission at the subdivision stage should Council approve the variance. So what would happen next is if Council did agree to this variance, the applicants would have to go through the detailed engineering design as part of the subdivision approval. And in that regard, the variance is permissive. It means that they could go as low as these things. If we took something like ditch width as an example, the variance would permit the municipal engineer to look at a deviation from the subdivision development control bylaw down to 2 meters. However, if the design doesn't work, it's not guaranteed that it's 2 meters. The ultimate obligation that the approving officer would impose would be that the subdivision still works and is serviced efficiently. There were a number of other comments that Council raised that the applicant has responded to, and staff have summarized those in the report as well. Snow clearing and storage. At the design stage, the applicants are suggesting they will address snow clearing as per any municipal street. That is a requirement and a consideration in the approval of final design. So that would fall under the approving officer. I've kind of given drainage as an example, so I won't get into further detail in that unless there's questions. The Council may recall the original variance application included a variance for the setback of an existing dwelling. Through the road redesign, that variance is no longer required. They did make some amendments to the road configuration and alignment to eliminate the need for that variance. So it's no longer included in development variance permit 124, which is before you for consideration tonight. Impacts on neighbors. Again, there's not an awful lot that the variance could do as part of that. It is a subdivision approval process. What staff did do is summarize some of the other comparable roads and their widths and their variances. And we'll remind council that Fernwood Drive currently is not a standard road. So we would not be going from a standard road to a lesser standard Fernwood Drive. In fact, this would probably be a wider and closer to standard portion than other elements of Fernwood Drive. And pedestrian connectivity, this was an area that council raised that staff did look at quite closely with the applicants. Again, it's kind of outside of the purview of the variance, but it is relevant because council raised it. One of the limitations and challenges we discovered is that there's kind of two desire lines where people walk through informal trails now. One effectively goes to the church to provide a bit of a bypass, and the other does lead down kind of towards the post office. The challenge with both of those alignments is that there's very little likelihood of imminent or anywhere in the foreseeable future redevelopment of the lands that lie between the subject property and those desire lines. So effectively we do not have the ability to acquire rights of way over the other properties that intervene where the trail would need to align to make it connect from this property to any other destination point. So for that reason, again, in the variance, there's not really a mechanism to secure that. If it is an item of council, one of the suggestions staff has is if council does want to proceed with the variance, or if there are certain elements of council comments that may not be capturable in the variance, that council can put forward a resolution making some recommendations to the approving officer. Now, those are not binding. The approving officer is an agent of the province acting in a subdivision capacity, but if council did want to convey some recommendations around pathway connectivity or other matters that are not included in the variance permit itself, council can certainly make that recommendation to the approving officer, and it will be considered as part of their final review. So with that, Mr. Mayor, just process-wise, as a development variance permit, the matter was advertised as per the Local Government Act. There was some correspondence received, I believe as recently as yesterday, that has been distributed to council. Customarily, although this is not a formal public hearing in any sort, often there's an opportunity for the applicant to make representation, and if council chooses to hear from the public, that would be recommended as well. And with that, there's a recommendation before you. The permit is attached to the report. Also attached is the earlier report that council deliberated in May of this year. With that, Mr. Mayor, I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. So do we have anyone in attendance wanting to provide comment? Do we know?
There are no hands raised at the moment, Mr. Mayor. Oh, there is a hand raised. Dr.
Okay.
Nick
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open for first of all, for some points of clarification or questions for staff from council, and then I'm going to ask council if they would like, and then we will open it up to the public. So are there any questions to start? Questions from council? Okay, so for those in attendance who do wish to provide comment on the proposed DVP, you can click the raise hand feature in the webinar controls. This will notify village staff that you'd like to ask a question. Village staff will announce your name when it's your turn, and you'll be prompted to unmute your microphone. Please be reminded that only comments directly related to the proposed development variance permit are permitted.
Councillor Antonelli had her hand up.
Pardon me?
Councillor Antonelli had her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to be really clear on what we're talking about here, because there's a few points in the report. It talks about the remainder. So we're looking at a new lot is being made on the uphill side of the road, and then 2 new lots on the downhill side, and then a fourth lot with the existing home on it would be considered remainder. Is that what we're talking about?
Mr. Mayor, through you, this application actually raised some, we clarified how we're going to communicate with everyone about lots. So if we were to call this a 4-lot subdivision, it's confusing whether there's 4 lots or 3 new ones and there's already one existing. So we haven't assigned a remainder per se. We're just letting council know that this would take the 1 existing lot and create 3 new ones for a total of 4.
that answer your question, Councilor Anton?
Yeah.
Any further question before I open it to the public? Okay, I'm going to go to Ms. Kennedy. Can you let me know if there's anybody who wish to speak?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Nick Fisher has his hand raised.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Fisher. Evening, Mr. Fisher.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Nick Fisher. I live at 1362 Fernwood. So I appreciate the lot owners have made some sort of clarified what they're doing there. Can I just ask though? My understanding is that all of these discussions about road widths and so on is relating to all of the roads beyond the existing Fernwood Drive. And so essentially, we're still going to be left with a very, very narrow drive, which we have, through which there's going to be all this additional traffic going. So for four houses total, plus the 3 new houses, plus the remainder lot, plus the other house that's up there. And so that's my first question, and whether there is any intention to try to upgrade the remainder of Fernwood Drive at all. And then the second question is that my understanding about this process is that this is the application for a DVP, and that if this is granted, then the application for actual subdivision is a non-discretionary process. So really, this is the only opportunity for any comment by either myself or by council. So those are my sort of 2 questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Chalmers, can you take that?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, through you, the tentative approval letter that has been issued in support of the subdivision by the approving officer, we can't be definitively clear one way or the other whether there's some minor upgrading required on the existing portion of Fernwood. So at this stage, at the tentative approval letter, we don't have all of the details on the exact engineering alignment. However, the extent of those upgrades would not be a substantial rebuild of Fernwood. It may be some surface coating or some other improvements, and those will be at the discretion of the approving officer. And once it's designed, I will note that even the drawing attached to the staff report does show some potential widening and a realignment outside of the property in the existing Fernwood Drive road allowance. So that will require a servicing agreement and also approving officer approval. As to how the process works with this, council has been given a fairly specific list of requested variances. And if council approves that, that would enable the approving officer to approve the subdivision with a varied road standard. If the approving officer did not, or if council does not approve the variance, the applicants would have the ability, if it's possible, to amend the application to reflect a municipal standard road and be able to proceed. Generally, subdivision, the term non-discretionary is true in that there's a limited scope of reasons under which the approving officer can refuse a subdivision. The Land Titles Act lays those out quite clearly, and they do consider a lot of technical considerations like suitability of access and other things. At this stage, the tentative approval letter has gone out, so it does appear that it's headed down an approvals track for subdivision. But at this stage, not enough of the technical details and engineering is known at the level that's necessary for a final approval of the subdivision. So although the statement made by the public was true that there's the approving officer does not have free-ranging discretion, there are still obligations that must be met before a subdivision can be approved. And conversely, there's limited reasons under which a subdivision may be refused.
Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. Dr. Fisher, follow up?
Yeah, am I still on mic?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have any problem with redevelopment on that property per se. I think I just see that directly outside my property and Mike Gravnick's on the other side, and Shirley, well, Shirley Henry, her property there. At its narrowest point, that road is one vehicle in, one vehicle out. And so my concern about having the 3 extra lots rather, is around the additional traffic going up and down there and through that narrowed area. I don't know whether that's going to be a significant issue. Obviously, it may not be, but I just wanted to highlight that because I don't think I'm going to get another chance to do so. So thank you very much for allowing me that opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy, do we have any more raised hands?
No, Mr. Mayor, there are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, if they do come up, let me know. At this point, are there any other questions from council? And so staff is feeling comfortable with the snow removal ability with this narrow road, and I know it's been sort of covered, but I'd just like to feel good about that.
Mr. Mayor, through you, yes. So there are certain elements of the road that are not subject to a variance request. So that means that all of the considerations that go into a municipal standard road will still apply, including things like snow clearing. I know that is a significant issue that's considered by the engineering group when they do their review, and it will be incorporated in the detailed design. The applicant's engineer has stated that they will address it through their design efforts should it advance that far.
Thank you. Council, any more questions? Okay, then I'll be looking for a motion. The motion as presented is that council approves development variance permit 124 to facilitate a future subdivision of the lot located at 1368 Fernwood Drive, and that mayor and CEO be authorized to execute the permit. Somebody like to make that or a different motion? Anybody wants to make a motion? Gotta make a motion one way or another. Go ahead, Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, I don't want to make a motion, but I just want to make some comments. I do feel that when this first came to council, we got quite a few letters with the neighbors expressing concerns about drainage, snow clearing, traffic, all the things that we asked for information on. And I don't feel that we got information back on those items. I guess it's because the applicant doesn't want to put money into the design before they know they can go ahead. But from my perspective, I think the lot that is proposed on the uphill side of the road is very awkward. And I think there's going to be a lot of blasting required, and parking is really questionable, and where they're going to store the snow is a big question in my mind. So I personally don't feel like I have the information I need to make an informed decision until I know that there's parking, a place for snow storage, the road width will be, the ditches are narrow, so will there be sufficient road width once it's been plowed? Just all that information. I'm just not comfortable supporting a variance for a subdivision that I see as problematic, basically. I think the 2 lots on the downhill side of the road will probably work out just fine. But I have concerns about the uphill lot and all those other factors. So it's not a motion that I would put forward or support.
So, I've asked a few times if there's any questions. This is an opportunity to flush out those questions. So some of that information might be at hand. Staff might have that information, and if not, then we have to give clear direction to get that information. So, I asked about the road width and the snow removal. I think that was addressed to my satisfaction. So maybe if you would, we could ask those direct questions now. And so staff either can provide those answers or go after that information. So I heard parking, for instance. What would be your question around parking?
Well, if you've seen the uphill lot, it is essentially a rock bluff right beside the road. So where is the parking for that? And if they're able to carve out their 2 stalls, where will their visitors park? So there's just a lot of outstanding questions that I don't think can just be explained with, we'll look at that later. I feel like for me to make an informed decision, I actually need to know. And like I said, the reason for that is because we've had these issues specifically raised by the neighbors. So I'm not willing to just say, I'm sure it'll be fine.
I'm not asking you to. What I'm asking is I'm trying to flush out the information you're looking for. So we've had comments about trying to get all the information we need. So you mentioned parking. So again, either staff has the information and they can provide it for us, some of it now, or they can go get it. So in terms of parking on that uphill lot, does staff have any input in terms of how that would be addressed?
Mayor Richmond, through you. I'll start by saying the concerns that have been identified are all concerns that have been outlined as part of this process, and some of them are included in the TAL. There is still work that needs to be done to satisfy the approving officer about things like the grading, the blasting, the ability of the lots to function. I think the questions are more pertinent to the subdivision application itself, which in British Columbia is not a council decision. So I can understand and appreciate that it seems as though there's not enough information there. What's before you tonight is really just the question of whether or not the road width is satisfactory and the variance being sought is satisfactory. I can say, having consulted with the approving officer, that the concerns and comments that have been raised are not fully resolved and are included in the TAL letter and would have to satisfy the approving officer before the subdivision is given. Whether the road is built to an alternate standard or not, those questions still have to be resolved. It's just under the way the legislation is written in this province, that's not a council decision, as germane as the information may be to making this variance decision. So
just to be clear here, Councillor Antonelli's concerns, which are all in my mind very valid, are some or all of them are being addressed through the subdivision process, and we're here to talk about the variance only, which is the width of the road and whether that's satisfactory. But there is,
Mr. Mayor, and much more clearly than I said it, yes, that's really what the intent of this report is.
Right. Okay. Councillor Antonelli, did you want to follow up? You good with that?
No, I will just say that the width of the road enables a subdivision that may or may not be viable and may or may not impact the neighbors. So I can't really support it without that information. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Craddock, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. I guess the road was an issue for me right from the start, from the end of their subdivision out to the main road. And I asked the question at that time, what they're going to do to fix that portion of the road up because of the extra traffic. Listening to Mr. Chalmers, did I understand correctly that that'll be dealt with just through the planning department and the person that approves the plans?
Mayor Richmond, through you, that is an approving officer consideration under the Land Title Act. They must agree to the sufficiency of the access to service the subdivision, and that's typically done in consultation with what the Act calls the chief engineer. So the approving officer will work with engineering to make sure there's access that's satisfactory. I will say that Fernwood has some very significant topographic limitations to any substantial improvements at anything close to a cost that would be borne by a subdivision of this scale. So we don't anticipate that an option to make meaningful improvements to Fernwood really exists in terms of widening the road and other things. There may be some finishing work, but yes, that is a consideration the approving officer has to take into account. And again, we appreciate that's not in council's purview, and it is an issue obviously to the community and to council, and I think that's shared by staff as well. But it's hard to keep these things in the right buckets when we're dealing with a subdivision, but really that's something the approving officer ultimately makes the decision on.
And I guess, thank you very much, Mr. Chalmers. I think that's the only issue I have, is that it's here for a variance permit to do a subdivision, but council has no input on the road that goes into it that will service the site. And I guess I have some issues with that, because then we cannot direct staff to take a look at things. As the mayor has suggested, we have to be more direct on these questions. So I guess that leaves me also feeling somewhat out in the cold or off the road. Let's go that way.
Go ahead, Mr. Chalmers.
Mr. Mayor, through you, just I did bleed it into the staff report a little bit, but again, if council wants to proceed with the variance, or perhaps even if they don't, you can still make suggestions or recommendations or express concerns to the approving officer. And those are taken into account. They're just simply not binding because the approving officer is kind of an equal stature to council as a body when it comes to subdivisions. They're agents of the province and are implementing the legislation that the province has laid out, as well as the municipal bylaws. That doesn't prevent you from expressing concerns that you would like to have taken into account. But Councillor Craddock's summation of the decision-making is correct.
Thank you.
Any other comment or questions right now? Personally, I think it's interesting. I mean, we talk about and look at moving forward gentle densification of our neighborhoods and our current urban areas, as opposed to sprawl development. So trying to concentrate future development into already existing urban areas, we'll call them that in Pemberton. And I think this is a good example of it. And it's something that's always difficult to process to go through because it affects neighbors nearby and those that enjoyed a view or a yard or whatever it might be. It changes their lifestyle. On the other hand, in terms of a planning approach and a forward-looking approach, there's a lot to be said, I think, for gentle densification of our neighborhoods. Similar to some of the other issues that came up tonight, carriage houses and that sort of thing, to diversify our housing inventory and to try to provide more affordability. These are things we're going to look at through our OCP review coming up in the new year. And I'm really looking forward to that. These sort of requests are a little bit in advance, obviously, of that OCP review, but I think those are important considerations. We need to consider the neighbors nearby. We need to consider access and where we're going down the road in terms of where we see housing and housing options developing for us. So with that little ramble said, I am recognizing the process that has been explained to us carefully by staff, and that the actual road leading to the subdivision off of Fernwood is wider than Fernwood. I definitely see the concerns with adding some traffic and some volume to Fernwood. I don't think it's a substantial amount. I hear some very real concerns from Councillor Antonelli in terms of, well, I won't repeat what she said, but parking and others, which is not really being looked at in the variance. So for me, from my standpoint, I'm willing to support this variance at this point with all that said, and maybe some strong recommendations to the approving officer as to what we would want to see. So that's my input on it. But at this point, I'm looking to council for a motion to that effect or any other effect that they would wish to table. Anyone wouldn't want to put a motion on the table?
Mayor Richmond?
Go ahead, Councillor Snap.
I guess what I'm hearing from council is this, the road width is a big concern. And what I'm hearing from Mr. Chalmers is that we can only make recommendations, which in my mind, if the approving officer just goes straight ahead, then this subdivision could get built without anything being done to this road at all. And in my mind, that's a big concern for Mr. Fisher, the rest of council. And to satisfy Councilor Antonelli's question, I'm wondering if we can send staff back to get that information of how that road can be widened before we move forward with this development variance permit. Because right now, what I'm hearing is that council doesn't want to make motion one. And if we get this information for council about how this lane width can be built, then we can go from there.
So thank you, Councillor Zan. I think from what I've heard is that there aren't a lot of options for widening Fernwood. There could be some options for finishing the edges and providing a little more space, but we can ask staff to give more information on that. With that in mind, I think it's more an evaluation of numbers. It's the metrics. Can Fernwood handle 3 more houses times 2.5 vehicles per household or whatever, however the math works? I think that's what council is struggling with right now. Can the Fernwood either slightly finished or in its current condition handle what we're talking about for 2 extra homes, because it's the extra.
May I ask another question?
Yeah, for sure.
So if we go with recommendation 2, then does that leave this, for lack of a better term, dead in the water, or will this come back to us with further information or recommendations? Because Pembina does need more housing. There's no question about that. I'd hate to see the subdivision just go away, but obviously there's some big concerns here from neighbors and the rest of council.
So I think to answer your question, if we want more information to feel comfortable making a decision on this variance request, then we could ask for that specific information and bring it back to the next meeting. But we need to be very clear about what we're asking for that's different than what we've got. So, we've heard in the report what the feeling is on Fernwood from staff and others. What more we could add to that if you like? Absolutely. So if we want more information to look at this a second time or another time, Councillor Zam, it's not dead in the water, I guess, to answer your question. We can certainly bring this back with more information as requested by council.
Councillor Antonelli? I was hoping, because like I said, I'll support recommendation 2, but I'd like your input as far as what information staff would come back with. This is more your area than mine, but I will support recommendation 2 if we can get some information, more information to satisfy your questions and Councillor Craddock's questions.
Well, if you look back at the previous council resolution, it does provide a list of information that we wanted to see. And I guess I wanted to see the details on that, have it proven out with a site plan. And I think parking is very relevant to the road width. Yeah, just look at the previous council resolution and work on those issues and prove them out.
Okay. Again, I'm looking for a specific motion here. So if somebody would like to make a motion and ask for the detail, then please, let's do that. I'm quite happy to entertain that. I'm trying to look for.
Do we have that resolution handy?
It's in your report.
46.
Thank you.
$46?
That's the options.
Oh no, he was asking for the resolution from our last meeting, I think.
Oh,
Page 20.
apologize.
Page 29. 29.
Nikki.
All right, there we go. So that council refers the application DVP for snow clearing, drainage, setback on the house, impacts to neighbors, snow storage, and pedestrian connectivity. So we can go through them again. I feel that snow clearing was addressed, drainage was spoken to, pedestrian connectivity. So what more, like what was lacking in the information that came out on those points that we would like more on? I don't see parking on there, so it sounds like, oh no, parking road width, impacts to neighbors. So it sounds like we would like more information on parking on the subdivided lots, Councilor Anthony, that the subdivided lots themselves provide ample parking. Is that part of what you're looking for?
Yeah, and visitor parking for the 4 homes. Yeah, I would just go back to that resolution and go through those items and provide detailed information, including site plans, to let us know that this works before we provide a variance that may significantly impact the neighbors.
Okay, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm pushing it, but I'm just struggling, and I want to get staff to get council what council needs here. And so Mr. Chalmers did a report on A to F. There's some detail missing on there. So the parking I've heard, we could send them back with the list. I just feel like we're sending them back with the same list though. So I'm just trying to direct staff here. So, and Ms. Gilmore, maybe you could help me out.
I think ultimately what was conveyed in the report is that the applicants may not choose to do that level of detailed design because that happens in the subdivision and they have to expend a significant amount of dollars. And again, I'm just speaking for what my interpretation of what this would be. So if they're not going to go ahead with the subdivision and they've spent tens of thousands of dollars proving this out and they don't get the variance, then they've thrown all of that time and energy and money away. Just because they get the variance, and I'm not supporting one way or the other, just because they get the variance doesn't actually mean the subdivision is going to happen. So we've already gone back once, and it may be that the applicants choose not to get that information because that's a significant investment to be brought back. You know, I think Mr. Chalmers has laid out sort of what we can as far as the variance required to be brought back. And also as far as parking, in our bylaws, you have to have all of your parking on site. You must have your parking on site. You can't use the road for your own personal parking. Even for visitors, you're supposed to be accommodating that. So I think there's some challenges where it's like the cart before the egg, or the cart before the horse, what's going to come first? And for them to go down that road, they would need some knowledge because the road width will not satisfy the subdivision servicing bylaw. They cannot proceed with subdivision without this variance. So that is the trigger point to proceed with doing more detailed engineering drawings to submit for a subdivision. And again, it still may not prove that out. So as Mr. Chalmers was, I could see it, it's frustrating to try and even difficult to explain where those different powers of I guess, permission or approvals lie. And that's some of the challenges that we've been faced with trying to bring forward not all of the items that council was looking for because they don't have them yet. I don't know if that helped at all, but it's
Helps a little bit, but it still doesn't, I mean, it helps, but on the other hand, you know, council's level of discomfort is around giving a variance. You know, I get the cart before the horse in the order of things, but then it feels like council's giving approval of something that hasn't been flushed out. So that's where there's a lack of comfort. Councilor Zant, you have a question?
So something that Miss Gilmore just said that I wanted to just question her on again is that so, and I think I just misunderstood this from Mr. Chalmers' report is so right now the lane width is unacceptable to the subdivision bylaw. Is that correct?
yes.
And so therefore they can't move forward with the subdivision until that lane width is dealt with as per the bylaw.
That's one of the issues. The rest haven't been all proven out. The tentative approval letter has an extensive list. They must water, sewer, drainage, snow storage.
Right.
There's a lot of items for them to deal with, but we know for certain that they are not going to meet the road standard.
Right.
So that's the reason this is coming forward first, to vary that.
Okay. So because what Mr. Chalmers was saying and where I kind of got stuck and is that after this council can make recommendations, but that we can't make it binding. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But then at the same point, the subdivision can't go forward unless they're,
The variance is approved. I agree, it's tricky.
Unless the variance is approved, but at the same time, they can't move forward unless they're abiding by the bylaw. But if they can't abide by the bylaw, then the subdivision doesn't get approved.
If the applicants had made a subdivision application and they met the road standard, this would not be coming forward before council. It would strictly be an issue that the approving officer deals with. So at this point, it's coming forward because the road needs to be smaller. And so that's why, and it needs to vary the bylaw width. And that's why it's before council. That's only a matter that that council can vary, not the approving officer. I know.
So if we support this, it's basically a total leap of faith that the system will take care of these issues as they come up. And that's all we can do is refuse it or make a leap of faith here.
Well, I think the tricky part of it, Councillor Noble, is that, like the CAO said, if they didn't need a road variance, and their road variance isn't on the main part of Fernwood, that already exists. It's on the extension, which is wider than the existing part of Fernwood. The only reason we're even talking about the subdivision at the council table is because they're looking for a road variance. The other aspects, the drainage, the parking, the site layout, those sorts of things would go through the usual subdivision process and be looked at by the approving officer. So yeah, you're right, but we wouldn't even be talking about this if it wasn't for the road variance. So we are understandably wanting to protect the neighbors and the neighborhood, and therefore looking at the whole thing. What we're not meant to be looking, but what is before us is the actual variance on the extension of the road, which is actually wider than Fernwood. So concerns have been brought up by neighbors. Yeah, but what does this mean? So we're looking at it, and I think that's great, because I think it means we're listening to people and trying to figure it out. But just to be clear to your question, leap of faith, yeah. Like I said, if they didn't need the road variance, the leap of faith is always there. The approving officer will always be the one deciding whether drainage is appropriate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the way the process works. Go ahead, follow up, Councilor Noble.
I mean, I feel like we all want to make sure the neighbors' concerns are addressed, but we're feeling really restricted in our ability to do so.
Mm-hmm. That's a fair statement. Yeah. And it's complicated, because on one hand, by permitting the road variance, that allows the subdivision and the density and everything else to happen. So we feel an understandable responsibility to make sure that's correct. The way the process works, it's asking us, does the variance on this chunk of road make sense or not? Are we okay with it? Having gone through asking questions about snow clearing and that sort of thing. And then the approving officer does the rest of it. Would I have designed the system this way? Maybe, maybe not. So it's tricky for sure. And it's put us in a tough spot. Again, we're trying to listen to the concerns of neighbors, and we're also trying to do what's right in front of us. So I think that's why everybody's struggling here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councilor.
For sure. On the other hand, I totally support infill, because it just makes so much sense economically, environmentally, in pretty much every other way.
So again, our options are to either approve the variance or to send staff back with a request for more information on the road width, so that sort of thing. Or another motion that I haven't thought of, but I'm looking to you guys to move forward on this. We need to get going. I think we've exhausted this. Is anybody willing to make a motion? I will make the motion to support the development variance permit. Would anybody like to second the motion for consideration, for conversation? Councillor Noble, further discussion on the motion to support the DVP. Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? 3 opposed, motion fails. Would anybody like to present another motion and ask?
Could I just clarify, would everybody like to have that noted in the minutes? Your opposition in the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, would anybody else like to present another motion? Go ahead, Councilor Antonelli.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that repeats the previous motion with the addition that a site plan come back with details that address the issues we've raised.
Seconder?
Second.
Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Could I just make sure that Councillor Antonelli, you want to have the exact wording from the previous motion? with that same list. Just want to confirm.
Can I ask a point of clarity?
Brooke,
Sorry, go ahead. My apologies.
just with the addition that it come back with a site plan and details so that we can effectively assess the impacts of this variant.
So the exact same wording from the previous motion with the addition of, and that a site plan with details that address the issues be included or be brought back. Okay.
Can I ask for a point of clarity? If in the world of development, if it's not approved, does that mean it's refused? I believe it does. So I don't know if we can pass a secondary motion to bring back more information.
That's correct.
Okay.
So that means they can't reapply for the developments
For 6 months, is it? Is it?
There's a requirement under the act that if council wants to waive the waiting period, they can do so on application by the applicant, and it oddly requires a 2/3 majority vote of council to waive the waiting period if they come back with a substantially similar application. But so that's the only consideration council could have at some point if the applicant wanted to look at a reapplication for the variance and provide additional information now that it's been refused. They can bring that forward to council, and if council supports the waiving of that with a 2/3 majority, then council can hear the application within 6 months.
There you go. Okay, well,
So did that last motion pass? Will we need to rescind that then?
so in other words, if we leave the motion the motion that I made that died, if he leaves it as stands, then the applicant can't come back for 6 months or can't be reconsidered for 6 months. So with that information in mind, people are comfortable with it, we carry on. Otherwise, we could rescind the motion and make a motion to come back with the information for Councilor Antonelli. Go ahead, Sheena.
I'm not sure you can rescind the motion to when you've already, because you've
essentially refused it. I think you can only
refused
do
it.
the last one that you've done. Rescinded the last motion.
Yeah.
Councilor Antonelli.
Why don't we just ask the applicant what their intention is, and if they want us to waive that 6 months, we could look at that. I don't mind that.
Could we deal with the first, just getting it back to where we were, because we have a new motion, and then if council's agreeable, I mean, I don't know if we want to ask them at this particular moment, but whichever you
I
prefer.
don't think she means right now. I don't think Councilor Antonelli.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, just in the following week, ask them what their intention is, and then we can work with them.
Sure. So maybe a motion to have staff contact the applicants to explain the process from here and see if they would like to reapply. Something like that. Okay, you get a seconder?
We need to rescind the second motion first. So you need to rescind that, staff go back and discuss with the applicants and bring back.
Did I actually call the question on that? So it's still on the table, but did I call the question?
I thought you had, no?
I think so.
I thought you called the question because
Yeah.
I was trying to get clarity and
Right.
it went pretty quickly.
So we'll need to, because we can't do it as described in the second motion, to ask staff to come back with that information. I'm looking for a motion to rescind the second motion. We'll start with that. Can I get the
I'll move that
motion?
motion.
Councilor Noble, seconded by
Zant.
Councilor Zant. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And now a motion to contact the applicants to explain the process from here and see if they would like to apply and ask for a waiver of the 6-month requirement. Moved by,
Councilor Zant.
second by Councilor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So in terms of bringing back any further information, we wouldn't do that until we complete the second motion, second resolution, right? Or is staff looking for anything else at this point?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chalmers. We are on to number 2, request to rename Sabre Way to Sunstone Way. Ms. Pedrini, I will turn it over to you to present.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So the purpose of my presentation tonight is to seek Council's consideration of a request made on behalf of Sunstone Ridge Developments to rename the portion of road known as Sabre Way to Sunstone Way. And the location of the subject area is adjacent to the village's rec site. So as background, the recreation lands were gifted to the village of Pemberton from Art and Nellie Dendoff. And as part of the negotiations and the obligations that the village had to meet in order to receive that gift, there was a request to formally dedicate the name of that road as Sabre Way. And so the village did approve that request in a resolution in 2017. At that time, the village of Pemberton did not have a street naming bylaw, but one was, well, we had sort of a historical method on how to name streets that was from a policy from 2003, but in 2019, the village did pass a new street naming bylaw. Sorry, in 2017, after this road was named Sabre Way. And at this point, we have received a written request from Niall Wilcox, who is the president of Sunstone Ridge Developments, to change the name to aid in wayfinding to the Sunstone subdivision. So the street naming bylaw does lay out street renaming criteria. So if council did wish to consider renaming a street, there is a number of criteria that they should look at. And I've included those in a table on pages 52 and 53. So items such as the historic significance of the existing name, the length of time the road has, or the name has existed, the total number of street addresses on that street affected, current land uses, and any whether or not there's any in-stream applications on the affected area. So I've just explained sort of the historical significance of the existing street name. It was named Sabre Way to recognize the donation of land to the village from Art and Nellie Dendoff for recreational purposes. The road has been named Sabre Way for about 3.5 years. And the total number of street addresses on the street currently, there's only one property with a civic address of Sabre Way, and that's 2000 Sabre Way. The actual civic address of the Pemberton and District Rec site is a Farm Road East address. So that wouldn't be affected. And the education site, which is also accessed via Sabre Way, has not yet been assigned a civic address. The current land uses of each address, so we're just looking at the one 2000 Sabre Way, it's currently vacant. The property is zoned as Rural Resource 1, although its intended future use, which would only happen through a successful rezoning, would be for neighborhood commercial. In terms of whether or not there are any in-stream development applications on the street affected, there is not. And is there any existing or planned road systems for the affected area? Not really. As I mentioned, it accesses the a portion of the recreation site, the education site, as well as the Sunstone subdivision. So in terms of those criteria, that's what council should use in order to consider this request to rename the road. Staff has reached out to the Dendoff family and asked their opinion as to whether or not, would they have any major opposition to the road rename, and we were told that they would be agreeable to the proposed street name change. And that's given the fact that the village has also already offered to name a major facility on the recreation lands in recognition of the family's donation. So it was felt by a representative of the family that, given that, it wouldn't be a major issue to have that road renamed. One other part of the street naming bylaw that I should mention is that it allows the manager of development services to deem whether or not it might be necessary to hold a public information meeting when there is a street name change before us. And in this case, as an owner of a property in Sunstone, I feel that I could be in a perceived conflict of interest position. So I have asked the Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Gilmore, whether or not she felt that a public information session would be necessary, and I have the ability to do this under the bylaw, and she did not. So, I mean, it is an option if council felt that there was a need to get some public input. I suppose, you could ask for that, but this road rename actually will meet the intent of the street naming bylaw, and that would be to connect streets with different names to form one continuous street. So the recommendation before you this evening would be to approve the renaming of Sabre Way to Sunstone Way to aid in wayfinding without requesting the holding of a public information session, and that staff be directed to proceed with 1 month's notice and inform the developers of Sunstone as per the street naming bylaw.
Thank you, Ms. Virginie. Questions from council? Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
I'll just go ahead and move the recommendation, Mayor Richmond.
Thank you.
Second.
Further discussion on the motion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Virginie. It's because you were so thorough. It was that easy. Moving on, we're going to go to major development permit number 87 for Mountainside Collection. We'll just wait for some staff to join us. Oh, we have Ms. Reese and Mr. Chalmers' dog. Oh, no, we have Mr. Chalmers too. So yeah, we're going on to major development permit 87 Mountainside Collection. I will pass it over to you two.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The purpose of the report I'm presenting this evening is for Council to consider the major development permit application for 7360 Crab Apple Court submitted by Coombs Development Corporation. The application also includes variances with respect to tandem and visitor parking. The application was presented to the Advisory Design Review Commission on Thursday, May 7th, 2020, and based on the comments received, staff have worked with the applicant to revise the application accordingly. The property is designated in the village's official community plan as development permit area number 1, environmental protection, number 2, land constraints, and number 6, multifamily and/or commercial development. The lands are 4,550 square meters in area and are presently vacant. The subject lands are bounded to the east by the Arn Canal, and adjacent land uses to the north, south, and west include multifamily residential and mixed residential and commercial. The proposal is to develop 30 townhouses in 4 multifamily buildings. There'll be 11 different floor plans accommodating 2, 3, and 4 bedroom unit designs. Every unit has a patio and balcony, and units in buildings 3 and 4 feature private backyards. Additionally, the proposal includes a service building for on-site garbage and recycling collection. The applicant describes the architectural style as modern mountain farmhouse, and the townhouses will feature 2 color palettes of earthen hues. The site provides pedestrian connectivity with access points from Arbita Street, the Yarn Canal Trail, and Crabapple Court. The site is located close to public amenities, bus routes, and footpaths to encourage walkability and cycling. The proposed landscaping plan includes a variety of trees, shrubs, and grasses considering the 4 seasons. To address the 2 meters of elevation gain between Arbita Street and the buildings on the west side of the site, terraced retaining walls are proposed. They'll be constructed from naturalized stone and be incorporated into the landscaping. A shared picnic area located at the entrance of the site from Crabapple Court will serve as the main entrance to encourage community connections within the development. The subject lands are zoned commercial Portage Road C3, and the proposal meets the building regulations. Variances are requested to the parking regulations. So each unit has 2 ground level garage parking spaces oriented away from the public realm. Visitor parking and bicycle parking is offered throughout the site. The applicant is seeking a variance to permit tandem parking in the garage of 20 dwelling units with a floor area larger than 110 meters squared. The floor area of these units ranges from 123.4 meters squared to 129.8 meters squared. Due to the proximity of the subject lands to commercial amenities, recreational uses, and public institutions, supporting a walkable neighborhood and reducing the presence of vehicles, this variance is supported by staff. Additionally, the applicant is seeking a variance to reduce the visitor parking from 8 spaces required to 7 spaces proposed, a relaxation of 1 parking space. While the site can accommodate 8 visitor parking spaces, the variance will allow for a generous turnaround at the end of the Strata Road. And while a turnaround space of this size is not required, the variance is supported by staff to contribute to improved circulation of the site. The proposal is generally compliant with the development permit guidelines. Staff recommend that both variances are approved and the development permit is authorized for issuance, subject to conditions, including provision of a landscape bond and payment of any outstanding fees. Please let me know if you have any additional questions for staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. Questions for staff? Ms. Reese, I have a question. Just if you could, better my report. I don't know if you want to go back to your screen share. I'm just, the picnic area, is it right at the side? Like, is it between the 2 sets of buildings right at the side of the turnaround?
Here, I'll just pull it up for you. So yeah, so this would be like the small picnic area at the entrance of the site, next to the visitor parking and the garbage and recycling building.
So that is the extent of the common space or common green space for the complex.
Yes, that's shared, and then owners have their own private outdoor spaces.
Right. Okay, that was my first question. Second one for me would be, you know, just looking quickly at the renderings and the layout, reminds me of some other developments. How are we feeling about access, parking, pulling in and out? There's a couple of our townhouse developments that somebody that's still driving a crew cab for certain reasons, I have a hard time getting in and out of, and so it just looked fairly tight in terms of the length of the driveways, the access on either side, the fire lane, that sort of thing. How does staff feel about the spacing on all that?
Yeah, so the driveways, they're not driveways. Parking would be accommodated in the garage spaces. So unlike some other townhouse complexes that we have in Pemberton that kind of have small driveways, which people use for parking, this development doesn't feature those small kind of half-size driveways. So the cars would be parked inside the garages.
So with this design, there is, besides the visitors parking, there is no available street side parking. Everybody must actually, for once, park in the garage. Yeah,
there is a couple of units, the B2 units, which do have slightly longer driveways, which is just to facilitate a curvature in the road to help as a traffic calming measure.
Mhm.
And then previously you'd also mentioned the circulation of the site, and that's why staff's recommending the variance to permit a vehicle turnaround at the end of the site instead of using this space for additional visitor parking.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody need the screen sharing for any questions, or can we remove that? Because I can't see all of you. Can you remove that, please, Ms. Reese?
Yeah.
Any other questions from council for staff? No other questions. Oh, Councillor Craddock, go ahead.
Yeah, no question, just a comment. I appreciate the comments back from the Advisory Land Use Committee. And on top of that, I'd say the letter we received back from Greg Coombs, I think addressed each of those issues very well. It doesn't leave me any questions to ask about them actually. So between the two, I'm very pleased about the type of professionalism that's come forward with this. So I want to thank staff for getting it done quickly and bringing us this report.
Thank you, Councillor Craddock. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, I found a quote. I'm trying to find the page number, but it says accessible overflow parking spaces are available here at the community hall building. Can you tell me anything about that?
Go ahead, Ms. Reese.
Yeah, through the mayor. Do you know where that comment was stated?
Oh, here, it's 98, page 98.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I think I understand what that comment was. One of the things that came forward with the original proposal was to provide accessible parking stalls. So the wider stalls are often referred to as handicapped or disabled parking. Those aren't required under the bylaw, but what's happened is they've decided to retain several of the parking stalls slightly larger so that they could accommodate accessible parking. Ms. Reese can correct me, but I believe that's what that statement was largely in regards to, that in the center of the site, there's some larger than required parking stalls.
Ms. Reese, did you want to add anything to that? Good.
Yeah, I would also just note that this comment regarding the parking is part of the landscape design. So I don't know if that's representative of the applicant's parking plans.
Councillor Antonelli, are you satisfied with that? You good?
Yeah, I think maybe it meant to say amenity building or garbage kiosk instead of community hall.
Right.
Because as it reads right now, that wouldn't be acceptable, but I accept that it might just be a bit of a typo.
Thank you. Further questions from council? Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, thanks very much. I guess the only thing that's got me a little bit concerned about everybody parking in their garage. It doesn't take long to walk around most neighborhoods in town and find out that the garages are used for storage and nobody parks inside. But I guess we'll just have to keep our fingers crossed that's the case, because other than a few visitor parking, there is no other space on site.
Well, that's the end. That's why I asked that question. With that design, there is no street parking, so people are gonna actually have to park in the garages. I don't know where they're gonna store their toys. It'll have to be in their bedroom. Put your snowmobile in your bedroom, I guess. I don't know.
I hope they can fit in the garages with their sled decks.
Spoken from experience. Okay, so are there any other questions? Did you have your hand up, Councillor Antonelli? Did I miss it? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have some comments, not questions. Are we on to comments now?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're on the comments. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I generally feel that the parking, especially in the tandem garages and the way the angles are lined up, will not be adequate for big trucks. I think it just won't work. But I think the tandem garages are very awkward. But I think all in all, I think the market will kind of sort that out. So somebody with a lot of toys in a big truck, hopefully will just see that that won't work there. And that the people who purchase here will have to have small cars and have to be willing to deal with tandem parking issues and the storage of their toys and whatnot. So while I think it could be a bit problematic, I'm still supportive of it because I think there's enough people in Pemberton now that have small cars and are willing to live that kind of lifestyle. I'm really pleased to see that there is some kind of social space outside that's not a private yard. So that's great. I'm really pleased to see the variation in the units. There's enough color and texture there. Yeah, so overall, I think it'll be a great place to live if you're willing to accommodate, I guess, the scale of the parking. I am concerned about giving up that one visitor parking stall. I'm concerned about that. Maybe staff has some comments.
Go ahead, Mr. Chalmers.
Mr. Mayor, through you, I think it's fair to say there's kind of two options here. The proponents did identify that originally as a parking stall, and it's kind of at the end of the project, so it's not a really intuitive place for one to go looking for parking. And I think on review, staff looked at the ability to have a more usable turnaround space at the end because it is a more urban style development. There's not an awful lot of room to maneuver. So it was staff that nudged it in that direction. Council, just process wise, council would have the ability to make the amendment to not approve that variance and to direct the amendment that be included as a parking stall and still proceed tonight if they chose. But that was the rationale for it being included. And I don't think it would be fair to the applicants for us to represent that because they did come forward with that as a parking stall at various points in the deliberation. So council can kind of go either way, although the circulation seemed deemed preferential by staff.
Thank you. My comments, I have some similar concerns about the parking, but I agree with Councillor Antonelli. I think that'll sort itself out. And if you don't want to park your snowmobile in your bedroom, then maybe that's not the unit for you because you're going to park your truck in your garage. So I think that'll sort itself out naturally. My single biggest reservation was around common space. I think as we do consider densification and we look at the population growth, it's important that our developments include communal space within each development. I recognize that we're on the canal and that everybody has their little yards, but I really like to see the inclusion of especially green communal space for development. So I felt that was a little bit small. That would be my single biggest concern. Otherwise, I think most things have been addressed and most things meet our development permit requirements. Any other comments? Councillor Craddock.
No other comments? If there is none, I'll move the motion to approve.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Further discussion on the motion? Question, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And that includes the and that's, both the and that's. So thank you very much, Ms. Reese and Mr. Chalmers.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, you too. Now we have no bylaws this evening. We're on to the mayor's report. I have about 5% battery, so I'm going to call a 3-minute recess to go grab my charger. I'll be right back. 3-minute recess. I'll be right back. Ms. Fraser, are you with us? All right. Thank you, everybody, for indulging that. I'll call this meeting back to order. And it leads us to the highlight, the mayor's report. I did have a busy couple of weeks and a bunch of stuff that I feel you need to be updated on, so you'll have to bear with me. I'll start off with the SLRD meeting from a week and a half ago. And again, I have a lot, so I'm really going to hit highlights. And if you have questions after, you want me to give you more detail on any of this, please let me know, but I'll try to hit it fast for you. We looked at, we got response from the environmental assessment office regarding environmental assessment extension request for wood fiber. I reported back on this. The board provided comment to this extension request. Bunch of the comments were meeting zero carbon output targets, more community consultation, and a number of other recommendations. The EA office has granted the extension to wood fiber. They have included many of our comments as recommendations, but not necessarily all of them as mandatory. So sort of a lukewarm response to that, but that extension has been granted. And then we were, the next item, we were asked to look at another EA extension for Garibaldi at Squamish. And this is in an earlier stage. So Garibaldi at Squamish is looking for an extension on their environmental assessment. And so the EAO has asked the SLRD board for input on that. So the input that came out of that, and just to review very quickly, Garibaldi at Squamish, an exceptionally impactful development potentially to our corridor. This has been something that's been in the works for many years and has gone through a number of iterations. So I'll break this in two. Part of the conversation was around the extension request. Well, it was all around the extension request, but specific comments from staff around staff housing, step 3 code, construction, environmental. There was a number of comments made by staff with regards to the extension that the board supported, and then the board's conversation went to the RGS, and the fact that this development has been, it's been in the books for many years. It's sort of, part of it's in the district of Squamish, part of it's in the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District. If it were to go through, there's no determination as to whose jurisdiction it would fall under at this point. But the board feels very, very strongly that at this stage, it falls that it has to go through our RGS and an RGS amendment, and a major amendment. The feeling at the board table for some time and through the RGS amendment process over the last number of years, or RGS update process over the last number of years, very much supported this direction, that this potential development needs, before it goes to the province, before it goes to any other agency, needs to come through as an RGS major amendment and local government. It needs local government agreement and support in some facet before it goes to the province. I'll leave it at that. That's we included those comments in our EA referral. They're not environmental necessarily, but we think that it's really important that this message gets sent out to the applicants again, because it has been said before, but that's where we feel that this process starts. It starts with local government, and it starts with our RGS before it goes through to the province. So a large discussion around that, and a strong recommendation on that. We had a number of delegations. The first was from Fortis, BC. They were presenting on the gas line extension. Gas line extension for Fortis is a 9-kilometer tunnel. It would go from the industrial park in the district of Squamish, 9 kilometers under the Sound to the North Shore. One of the important changes in this application is that, or in this presentation, is that the compressor site has moved from Mount Mulligan to the wood fiber site on the North Shore. This is something that the board felt strongly about and pushed hard on, as well as, or as a response to public concern about the Mount Mulligan site. There was a lot of public output at the time, that it should be located on the North Shore. So they've made that change, which requires an EA amendment as well. The completion of the 9-kilometer tunnel will be around January 2026. The workforce would vary over that time from 100 to 600. There was discussion, and there's information given and discussion around the social impacts, accommodation, how this could potentially eat into housing inventory in the Squamish area, or how they can add to it, how what opportunities came out of it. And again, through the EA process, the social impacts are very much considered. We also had a presentation from BC Hydro. They did their usual update on the systems within our regional district. So the Bridge River hydro system, the Joy Dam, which should be pronounced La Joie, but I'll call it the Joy Dam. The safety plans that they're putting in place with regards to cohorts and protecting their staff, and the accommodations as to where the workforce will be staying. We also had a delegation from the Birken Fire Department. Two of the main issues that they wanted to bring to the board's attention were the old telecom system. They basically have terrible phone connection and internet service, and the 911 communication is very spotty. They get frequent weather or power outages due to weather out there. And their system as it is, if you get a power outage, basically you don't have access to 911. So if somebody's in need of service, medical health, and it's a power outage, there's no 911 availability. So a few of their asks, and they went into obviously much greater detail. We know that the cell service is non-existent out there. And so their asks were essentially around upgrading the internet connection to the fire hall. They requested funds for a backup generator that would allow the internet to carry on in the event of a power outage, depending on the type of system you had in your home, and a backup communication link for ECOM and 911 to the fire hall. It was a good presentation, and there was some discussion afterwards, as well as asking TELUS to be able to use their, I think they're called cabins, part way up the valley that way to be able to do that upgrading. In the committee of the whole meetings, we had two major discussions. The first one was, and they're quite related, the first one was around the Britannia Beach Fire Department. So the deal around this is that as the SLRD has received applications for developments in that area, fire service has become a big part of this discussion around all of these developments. Currently, the Britannia Beach Fire Department is the fire department serving Britannia, Furry Creek, and the area. It's a department comprised of some really passionate volunteer firefighters in chief. They do a really great job. We had a good presentation from them as well. What this means with the development that's coming. So think of some of the projects that I've reported on, and I'm about to report on another. So there's Britannia North, which is the heritage commercial and residential development that I spoke of in our last meeting. There's Britannia South, which is Tiger Bay, which is the next item I'm about to speak to. There's Furry Creek, as well as other potential developments at Porter Cove. And so this would completely change the nature of the Britannia Beach Fire Department. And all of these developments are dependent on having some fire response for these developments to be viable. They're a big part of every one of those discussions. It means new training grounds, training requirements. Right now, they do exterior only. So at the minimum, they would need interior service and then eventually full service. The Furry Creek was talking 6-story buildings. So we're talking about complex buildings and ladder trucks and completely different training. The recruitment has been successful there in the past, but it's also a very different sort of fire department. Again, this is sort of small community fire department right now. This would be much bigger. It would require a second hall, a load of coordination. And so there was a lot of discussion as to what that would look like, not necessarily all the hows, but what that would look like. And again, it informs our discussions as we're looking at other developments, because this is really, really significant. So leading on with that, we then went on to look at the Tiger Bay or South Britannia development, excuse me, development application there. And just a quick reminder there, Tiger Bay, again, that's the south part of Britannia before you get to what used to be the Galliano Coffee Co. when you're coming, coffee company when you're coming north, where you see a lot of filming. It's 500 acres. They're looking for an OCP amendment and rezoning over 130 acres. Once it's broken down, the 500 acres would be about a quarter of which would be natural spaces, quarter of it would be residential, which I'll get into, less than a quarter commercial, and some playing fields, etc. But about 130 acres would be developed with the following proposal. So I'm going to go through really quickly. This is another development that's been in the books for many, many years under a few iterations. Where we're at with it at the board is this came to us at a committee of the whole to get our input. I'll jump ahead. I'm going to go through some of the information we were given in the issue, and I'll get into some of the issues. But to understand the next steps, basically by the end of it, a lot of input was given to staff to work with the applicant. And we, the next obvious steps would be to bring it back for first reading and then public hearing. The board asked that it come back to the committee of the whole with a response to a number of the issues that I'll give you before it comes to the board for first reading to make sure that these issues have been dealt with. So just to really quickly give you an overview of the project as presented, the residential component will be about 1,000 units. 150 rental dedicated, 50 affordable, and all, stress this, all townhouses and apartments. 1,000 units, all townhouses and apartments. And I'll get into some of the concerns around it. I'll just give you the overview and then give you some quick concerns at the end. The commercial component allowed for a little bit of office space, some food and beverage / pub, hotel, tourist accommodation. Tourist accommodation was a 50-room surf hotel, and I'll get into the surf bit. A 30-room hotel, 40 cabins, and 40 glamping spots, as well as a 30-room lodge on the waterfront at build out. That level of accommodation and commercial accommodation would allow for approximately 600 jobs. So when this proposal was brought in earlier stages, the board felt it was really important that it wasn't a commuter-only community, that there was commercial-based property allowed in there. I mean, when you consider that this is 1,000 units, 2.5 per unit, that's 2,500 people. I think we know what 2,500 people looks like in Pemberton. How many people we're putting on the roads. So there was a feeling that there had to be enough commercial lands included in the development. So I gave you the list of tourist accommodation and some office and food and beverage, but the center of it is a surf park. And they want to build a surf park as sort of the core of the commercial. That would provide for the lodges, that would be a destination, and obviously a lot of service jobs. And again, I'll get into issues. But that was their response to the board's request to have more employment lands within the development. These accommodations, commercial and otherwise, would require OCP amendments, incidentally. One of the things that was brought up is that if whatever form this goes ahead, these commercial employment lands should be done concurrently with the residential lands to make sure that there are people able to work within the community as the community builds. Parklands, 13 acres dedicated, Manatee Bay access. This was a huge part of earlier discussions. We said, don't even bother coming back if there's not public access to Manatee Bay. They will need CN approval for a pedestrian overpass to get to Manatee Bay as a result. CN is not prepared to give their approval of that until later in the stages of development, but they have agreed in principle to looking at it. They don't want a crossing, they want an overpass. I don't know if anything's changing with the lessened train traffic, but the public access to the park is key. It would be there are 13 acres of parks. There are pocket parks in and around the development. And with regards to trails, there's the Manatee Bay Park Trail. There's a waterfront right to the northern part of the property line trail. There's a trail on the east side of the highway and along the watercourses and wetlands, or the upland side of the development. From an institutional side, there is no allowance for school lands, and I'll get back to that. Community center, the developers have offered to provide a 6,000 square foot shell for a community center, and it would be a shell and it will be turned over to the SLRD to work with it from there. Fire services, I've kind of touched on that. Environmental natural spaces, there was some good strong language around protection of creeks and riparian areas and wetlands. The wetlands, we'd like to see some enhancement around the protection there. Transportation, it would be a right in and a right out for phase 1 of development. But once they reached, and I don't remember what the threshold was, a certain sugar threshold, it would only be right in. It would be, sorry, you'd be allowed a left in coming south to begin with for trucks to develop, but after that it would be right in and right out only with a turnaround. There's an 80-meter road dedication for a bypass, bypass one day of Britannia Beach, and discussion of a transit hub. And I'm getting there. Infrastructure, everything seemed appropriate from an engineering standpoint. And so now I'll get into really quickly a couple of the concerns or comments that were brought up around that. With regards to the housing and it being all townhouses and apartments, it's very dense. And you could look up on the SLRD website if you want to see the development. It's worthwhile having a look at, or the proposal. You know, with it being all townhouses and apartments, it's exceptionally dense living. So my question was, does it fit with our RGS for healthy community living and diversity of housing? Because really it's one form of housing only. And I struggled with that. The community center as a shell being donated to the SLRD, who's paying for the next steps to furnish that shell and develop it and all that sort of thing? That seemed like a really sort of way. It seemed like an easy way out on the community center thing. We'd like to see a little more detail in terms of how the community center can be paid for by that community and developed. The school, myself and some of the other board members, I feel one of the things that I struggled with a little bit was looking ahead going, okay, eventually I'd build out, this is a 2,000 to 3,000 person development, 2,000 to 3,000 people living here. I look around our little town and I go, okay, well, what does that require for commercial, from you know, barbers to physio to hardware and all that sort of thing? What does that require, you know, to keep people in a healthy community? And I don't know that this development has looked ahead far enough in terms of commercial needs down the road. I know they're near Squamish and therefore a lot of those needs will be provided there, but again, try not to put too many people on the road. Have they allowed for commercial needs in the future? And even in my mind, more importantly, have they allowed for school needs? So with 2,500 people or 2,000 people potentially in this development, with people in Furry Creek and Portal Cove and Britannia North, there are no new allowances for school lands in any of these developments. And so we're talking about, you know, a build out of all these 7,000 people or whatever it is. I mean, check my math, but the point is we're putting hundreds of kids on the road every day on these developments in school buses. In the winter, on Friday afternoon, when the ski traffic is coming up, et cetera, et cetera. And not only does that, in my mind, bring safety issues, but it also brings environmental issues with it. So whether it's on this specific site or within these sites, we have asked to have a better look at the provision of future school sites. So when the population demands it, they're ready to go. The transit hub, is it big enough? The access, there was issues on that were brought up. And again, the density of the residential, as much as we talked about density earlier, and I believe it in the right places, there seemed a lack of diversity in this housing, and the streets and the accents from a fire service point of view was quite worrisome to me. So a bunch of questions and information was asked, specifically of staff, to bring back and to work with the applicant and to bring that back to a committee of the whole before it goes to the board for first reading. So that's a lot, but it's a pretty major development, and I think all of us need to be aware of it and be ready to give input wherever. A few other things I attended. I did the IAP2 training for communication for leadership. I think a couple of the others, you might have been on that. It was, I thought, really well put on, and just talking about when and how to do the most effective communication and engagement with our residents. And I think there's some really good points for elected officials and staff to work with there. So that was really helpful. I was on the civics panel for community resiliency and recovery for and from the pandemic, along with the mayors of Langley, Nanaimo, Nelson, and facilitated by Coquitlam. Some really good conversation there. I attended the VCH board meeting, open board forum. I think some of you might have done that as well. It was an overview of the last few months, COVID, how we got here, the pandemic curve, as well as other services and surgeries, and a lot of the information that I've given you coming out of my VCH meetings, of which I've also had a number in the last couple of weeks, mostly focused around the new regulations and new orders. I attended a natural hazard mitigation workshop. And actually, maybe since you're tired of hearing from me, I'll let Councillor Craddock report on that, since he was there and I've talked enough. But one of the things it did highlight for me was the importance for us to be strong on our communication and our support for residents to be prepared and to understand the hazards that surround us, and therefore be well prepared. But I'll leave that to Councillor Craddock. I did a business check-in on December 1st that I organized with the Chamber of Commerce, and it was just an informal check-in with the business community. It was a great casual conversation, just cluing into how businesses have done up till now, how we're looking through the winter, and any ways that the village can support. There wasn't a lot of requests from the village. There were challenges brought up from credit card charges, the fact that now 95% of people use a credit card instead of cash, and businesses pay a higher percent, pay 3% on Visa transactions, and managing customers with masks, bringing more employees in, which incidentally I've heard from Work BC, from Natalie again, there's some trades training for carpentry, electrical, and plumbing coming as well virtually, so also paid for, so keep your eyes open for that. And PVIS, we've gone over. The one thing, I was acclaimed chair, and our own Ryan Zant was acclaimed vice chair. Oh, and I didn't mention, I did send you an email, but I didn't mention that at the SLRD meeting was the election of chair as well. Jen Ford from Whistler is our new chair, and Vivian Birch-Jones, director from Area A, the Pavilion area, is the vice chair there now. And sorry, just let me catch up on my notes. And on to a few details and coming up. I've got a conference call on Thursday. Actually, this council, if you can keep this in mind, I have a conference call with Minister Osborne, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, on Thursday. It's for mayors from our area. And they're going to provide some updates, some medical updates regarding COVID, but they're looking also for some input from communities regarding the next 2 months and how the province can support us. So I'll look to council and staff. I'm on that call on Thursday, you know, whether it's from processes and meetings or whatever else. If anybody has any thoughts that they'd like me to consider during that call, please let me know. VCH call on Friday. We have a Pemberton Valley emergency meeting next week. SLRD is next week. And then hopefully it could go on a little Christmas break because it feels like it's been endless meetings. But I would like to do a couple of quick acknowledgements and thanks. I want to thank the folks that put up the Christmas tree in the barn. I don't know if everybody's got a chance to see that, but it looks absolutely amazing. I should send it to you. I took a great shot from inside the barn of the tree with Mount Currie lit up behind. Really, it should be a postcard. It's really cool. So thanks to the folks that put that together. Sorry, I lost my page. So I also want to acknowledge our residents. You know, we made a lot of changes within our recreation department as per the orders from the PHO, and our residents have been very flexible and understanding as they apply for register for programs and they change and all that. So thanks to our residents in general on their flexibility. Also a reminder that outstanding property taxes and utilities are due on Thursday. I want to let everybody know that the Muni Hall will be closed from December 24th to January 2nd. And I think I'll leave it at that and wish everybody an awesome holiday season. I'm sure I've missed stuff, believe it or not, but I will leave it at that for council reports. Any council reports? I put you all to sleep. Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. And yes, we did have an emergency preparedness presentation, and very quickly because it's getting late in the day. A couple of things that came out of there that people should take a look at is there's a Village of Pemberton alert. There's SLRD alert that you could get on so that you're made aware of what's going on if there's any issues in the valley. They certainly highlighted the committee that's out there doing a really good job in Sarah Morgan, Kevin Clark, and SLRD, PVDD, and Sarah from the Village of Pemberton. So it's quite a committee they got going there, and along with some elected officials and the mayor, it's a strong committee, and they're bringing some good recommendations forward. Of the number of emergency preparedness presentations, and the one put on by Veronica Wordworth just previous to that, I think the thing that came out of me that struck me the most was the fact that the backside, north side of Mount Meager is moving at an average of 3 centimeters a month. And that's actually, when you take a look at that over the year, that's a fair amount of movement. And what they're suggesting is if that ever came down, that would be 10 times greater than the slide off Capricorn. And that's, if you figure that was around 48 million cubic meters, it's a lot of material, a lot of damage could be done in the valley. So I think it was really interesting, great presentation, some good people, and I enjoyed being at those presentations. And I also would like to wish the community, the staff, administration, mayor and council all the best for a healthy and happy Christmas and New Year's. I think that light at the end of the tunnel we've been looking for is starting to shine a little brighter, and hopefully it won't be long before we'll be sitting in council chambers again and having some cookies. So I look forward to that day. So all the best, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Craddock. Any other council reports? Councillor Noble.
Just a couple of things. I attended the IAP2 for decision makers on November 20th to learn more about public engagement and to challenge my technical lack of skills. And I enjoyed attending the PVIS meeting on the 3rd to see all our community groups show off their accomplishments for the year and hear their requests. And I'd just like to acknowledge that there's been a lot of loss in the community over the last month. At least 6 people since Pete and River. And that's about it.
Mr. Noble. Any other council reports? Councilor Zant.
Just quick one. I attended the library board meeting this week. One thing to mention is the Judith Walton was the recipient of the BCLT Trustee Award, as presented by the mayor and Emma Gillis and Steve Prane. One thing that did come up was that the library branches were moving to municipal affairs from the Ministry of Education. And we all thanked Emma for another great year and how she supported the community with the library and how they've worked around COVID. So other than that, it was they seem like a nice bunch on that board, and I'm looking forward to carrying on with it.
Thank you, Councilor Zant. Go ahead, Councilor Antonelli.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I also attended the IAP2, and that was interesting. And I've had my first meeting with Tourism Pemberton, so that went well. They have got lots of plans for next year. But Councillor Craddock reminded me of 2 weeks ago, there was the test for the provincial alert system. So I don't know if you all got it, but if you haven't, be sure to sign up.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Correspondence for action from Doug Benville, CO, Pure Extract Technologies, dating November 26, requesting that council reconsider business license fees for cannabis-related businesses. Any thoughts on this from council? Councilor Craddock.
I appreciate his letter and the information in it, and I certainly think it's something I would like to take a look at again. The first number of years we looked at this and put retail sales in downtown, there was a lot of concern about extra costs to police or by law enforcement and that type of thing. And I think at this point in time, it would be good to review that. And I feel that it's just become another business in the park. And it would be good to reconsider if we want to stay with the fees that are in place.
So would you like to bring forward a motion to bring that back for review at, I guess, a committee of the whole, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. In probably in February. I think that would be a great time to take a look at it. Thanks very much.
So a motion to bring that back to a future committee of the whole, moved by Councillor Craddock. Do I have a seconder?
Second it.
Further discussion? Question, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second is correspondence from the mayor of Vernon. And this is in support of universal no-cost access to prescription contraception available in BC under the Medical Services Plan, and requesting that all BC municipalities write their support as well. I feel like this is a pretty important direction. Would we like to pen a letter? Councillor Noble.
I'll move that we send a letter of support.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Further discussion? On favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 correspondence for information. Would anybody like to pull any of them out? Seeing none, a motion to receive 1 to 5.
Motion to receive 1 to 5.
Presented, seconded by Councillor Noble. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Decision on late business. Late business. There's a motion. Question period. I don't have my usual notes for the question period, but if there's any public in attendance, if you hit the raise hand function, staff will unmute you to ask a question. Ms. Kennedy, do we have any?
There are no raised hands, Mayor Richmond.
See, it's because of my mayor's report. I sent them all away. They all went away.
It almost sent me home.
Yeah, you know what? If I didn't share all that information with you, you'd be mad though.
Yeah, that's right.
Motion to go back in camera, please. Moved by Councillor Zad, second by Councillor Noble. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Everybody good to carry on, or does anybody need a break?
No, let's get her done.
Let's get her done. Okay, we will reopen in camera. Sorry, I got a lot of people going.
Mayor Richmond, if we could just give us a minute here, we've
I gotta find my spot anyway.
got to. All right, you're back in regular.
Okay, I'm gonna reopen the regular. And I'm gonna wish again everybody super happy holidays. Thanks for a super long day. All the best. Oh, what's up? What did I forget? Oh,
Rise with report.
I thought I just want to be done. Rise with a report from in camera from earlier this evening. Sheena, would you like to read that for us?
That staff has been directed to request quotes for snow clearing at the airport.
Moved by Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Craddock. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Have a great holidays, everybody. All the best. We're meeting adjourned. Have a good
Have a good New Year.
Christmas.
See you later.
Christmas. Take care.